before the first bell, when the torches along the ramparts had been coaxed down to stubs and the river was a dark whisper rather than a blade of light, Eddard Stark stood at the open casement and let the night air come to him. It smelled of damp stone and cold metal and the faint, sour smoke of hovels along the Blackwater. The city had its own breath, a tired animal exhaling under a blanket, and he could hear it if he was patient. A cart will turn somewhere below, iron rim clacking over a loose cobble. A woman sang low to pacify a child. From the kitchens rose the first restless clatter of knives and pots. The hours before dawn belonged to servants and men who worried. He had not slept. The chair near the cold hearth showed the smear of his hand where he had been turning a sealed letter over and over. The wax had the shape of a slender fish pressed into it. Catelyn's seal, cut fresh in the north, carried all the distance by careful fingers and faster horses. He had not broken it. Its weight was not the weight of paper alone. This he knew by how it had held his eye from the table while he paced, how it had lain there like a stone on the bottom of a pond, distorting the water above it. He could reach and tear it open now, take the words into himself and be changed. But once read, a letter could not be unread, a choice not unchosen. So he left it unopened, and looked out into the city he had not wanted and the morning he could not keep at bay. The room was plain compared to chambers prepared for kings. He had not let them move him there. The tapestries on these walls, thick with strange vines and birds that did not flock in the north, already seemed too much ornament. Someone had set out a basin and left a folded linen beside it, clean and white. On the table lay a short stack of notes requiring seals or replies. A tally of grain stores compiled by a thin steward with a crabbed hand. A list of names the gold cloaks had added to the cells. A folded missive from the Lord Commander of the City Watch who preferred to write his fears rather than speak them. Beside the letters, laid in a straight line as if a mason had set the angles, rested his father's seal, a little worn along the edges, the direwolf's head in profile rubbed smoother than it had been when it left Winterfell. A draft snuffed the candle beside the window into a trembling tongue of smoke. He closed the shutters halfway and returned to the table. His fingers found the cord of one of the missives without thinking. Grain, ironmongers, the outer wells along Ropemaker's Row had failed. The Bakers' Guild requested more guards during deliveries. All of it was ordinary and none of it was, for he knew how ordinary things became kindle when winds shifted. It was easy in a winter country to measure a realm in the fullness of granaries. He had learned this. Here, trade was its own weather, capricious as a gulling boy. The doors opened with a knock spoken after the fact. Jory would have waited. Varys never did. Even without the silk's whisper or the perfume that clung to him like a second garment, the eunuch's shape was unmistakable, soft where other men were cut and fitted. He glided rather than stepped, hands folded as if they must not disturb the air. "My lord," Varys said, and his voice came mild from the shadows near the threshold. "You were awake." "As are you," Ned said. "Always," Varys said, tilting his head and offering a smile that felt like an apology stitched to a compliment. "These hours are for men who cannot afford to be surprised by the day." "Might I?" Ned waved his permission and Varys came to the table as if arriving at an altar. He did not touch any paper. He looked at the unbroken seals as if they were birds he would never frighten, only admire. "The city breathed last night without incident," Varys said in the tone of one reporting that a crop had not failed. "The gold cloaks walked their rounds like faithful hounds. Yet one grows wary of a hound that has learned to choose which strangers to growl at. Lord Peter finds their loyalty reassuring. I confess I prefer it when loyalty glances higher than a purse." Ned did not sit. He stood with his hand on the back of the chair, his thumb roughened from old sword work, and watched Varys watching the letters. "You came to tell me something more," he said. Varys sighed, a soft sound, and let his gaze travel to the window where the shutters had been drawn or to something beyond them. With Varys, the line between inside and out could never be trusted. "The septon you requested will be ready." He slept at the Great September and prayed most of the night, or so the acolytes tell it. An old man's back protests the cold of stone floors, but he insists his sleep is best when it is thin. His hands do not tremble as much as one might fear, and his voice is steady. He will speak clearly when it matters. The words struck the air and lay there. Ned put his weight on the chair and felt the frame resist. "And her?" he asked, though he had not meant to. "She is awake," Varys said. "She has allowed her women to do her hair. She drank watered wine and barely touched bread. She has sent for her children, each alone, and spoken with them separately. I do not know what she said to the girl, but I heard a laugh in that chamber, high and bright as summer glass. The boy Joffrey entered her room angry and left it something other than angry. Not at peace, never at peace, but contained. He is his mother's son in that respect." Ned thought of a golden head bent close to a mother's lips, of words he could not imagine and did not wish to hear. He thought of Joffrey as he had seen him last, standing too straight, brittle as a shaft of sugar, a smile like a knife. "And the father?" he said. "Oh," Varys said lightly, so simple to say and more complex to answer. "If you mean the father in the way men have spoken of fathers in halls for centuries, Lord Tywin is on the road. He does not ride so swiftly as anger would alone make a man ride. He has sent ravens and a vanguard, and a promise that the main force will not enter the city without your leave. He wishes his daughter to be publicly safe when he arrives. If you mean the father in the way we have cause to speak of fathers this month, Ser Jaime is here and isn't, depending on how much you care about the difference between a man and his armor. He has sworn before the council to sheathe his sword inside the city. He has also, in private, managed to look at me with a silence so full that I nearly thanked him for not filling it with words." Ned's mouth thinned. There was ice in him, and he called on it now, not to freeze, but to keep intact. It had become a discipline in this place, to be whole when the air was crowded with others' designs. "The North has its own fathers," he said, not to correct Varys, but because speaking of Winterfell steadied him. "They do not ride so swiftly or send so many ravens." Varys nodded as if Ned had made a clever joke about a matter too grave to joke about. "I was also asked," Varys said, "by a very small and very determined lady to tell you that she is not a flower to be pressed between pages. She used precisely that phrasing, which I admire. It is not the phrasing of a court, which I admire even more. It was, in truth, your younger daughter, who left the room before I could swear to deliver the message. Children are seldom patient when their honesty has finished its business." A flicker passed through Ned's mind with that name. Arya had flown like a sparrow between the legs of some disaster that should have caught her and had not. There had been hours he expected her to be hauled back by guards with dirty hands and explanations. Yet she had returned with her face streaked, with crumbs on her tunic, with a new nick on one knee, and she had eaten as if every bite was a promise. She had not asked to see the dress the seamstresses had prepared for Sansa to wear to the ceremony. "Sansa?" he asked. "Sleeping, but her sleep is a posture," Varys said, considering. "Girls learn young how to close their eyes without letting go of their worry. She will be, how shall I say, sweeter than this city deserves and braver than men will give her credit for. You should know that last night she broke a comb in her hair and wept over it as if it were a crown. Loss is not measured by others' scales." Ned did not flinch, but the words found something tender under the armor he had been building since the first day he put his boot in this place. "Thank you," he said, which was both courtesy and recognition. "How many eyes will be at the September?" "Enough to make silence difficult," Varys said. "Not enough to make it a riot if someone sneezes at the wrong moment. The guilds will send representatives. A few ships' captains have come inland like curious gulls to stand on a steeple and look around and say they were there. The poor come early and leave if the sun gets too much for them. The nobles will arrive just late enough to demonstrate that their time is a luxury. The Queen has decided not to be late. She will make you wait for other things, but not this." Ned closed his hand on the back of the chair once more and then released it. "Will she?" he said, and the question was not for Varys so much as for whatever parts of himself still insisted on measuring what was fair. "Today," Varys said, spreading his hands and making a small bow as if to offer the day as a platter. "She will." He looked at the letter on the table, the one with the fish. "This is not my place," he said, with a voice that meant he knew it wasn't and had decided to stand very near that threshold anyway. "But I am a servant of a whole realm rather than a single heart, and so I have learned to concern myself with the posture of men's hearts when they must carry weights. That letter will open whether you open it or not." "It will keep," Ned said quietly. "For a time," Varys agreed. "When a storm has finished its performance and the audience has found its homes again, the damp remains. A woman like Lady Catelyn does not write to bless a man's choice without asking him to be very certain he intends to wear it. May your certainty be as sturdy as your boots." He withdrew, bowing again, and left as quietly as he had arrived. The door was closed with care, with no click of latch to draw the attention of the room to itself. Ned stood for a moment with the silence Varys had left him and then crossed to the basin. He did not splash the water on his face. He cupped it as if drinking and pressed his hands to the hollows beneath his eyes, the chill holding there until his skin warmed it. He chose a plain tunic from the chest and a darker overcoat without heavy braid. No one in this city could mistake him for anything other than what he was, no matter how a seamster arranged cloth. His hair had gone more gray on the journey south. Even simple things grew older here. He fastened the wolf at his throat and buckled his belt as Jory had taught the boys to buckle theirs. Check the hole, test the tongue, give it a tug to settle the leather into itself. The weight of the dagger at his side tugged against him, a gravity he had accepted as part of his attire. He moved to the table and took up quill and a strip of parchment. He did not write Lady Catelyn's name, but began with the boys. "Robb," it said, and his hand firmed as he laid a line beneath the name. He told Robb that the air in the city carried salt, that their father had seen a fish hawker toss scales into a barrel with such skill it was like watching coins vanish into a juggler's sleeves. He told Robb a handful of small, careful things: the narrowness of the streets down by the blacksmith's lane, the cacophony of bells, the way gulls rode the wind over the river without moving their wings. He did not speak of thrones or vows. He told him that a man did not become something else because others had decided to call him by a new name, but also that names could forge claims for those who could not forge anything with their hands. He told Robb to keep the old gods fed with attention, to walk in the godswood and stand where the earth remembered them, to listen to the wind in the leaves as if it were his own blood chiding him for haste. He blotted the ink with care and sealed it with the dire wolf, pressing harder than he needed to. Another letter, shorter. Bran, no line beneath this one, because boys disliked the look of being underlined by a father more than they disliked being scolded. He told Bran that he had seen a boy in the yard training with a wooden sword too long for him, and that the boy had found a way to balance it by gripping higher along the hilt, and that this was how we begin to make tools into extensions of ourselves, not by forcing the tool to be smaller but by learning where to hold it. A third letter, no seal yet, for the baby who did not read and wouldn't for years. Rickon, and then here he stopped, because to speak to a child months away by horseback was to whisper to the air itself, and he had no skill left for that. Movement at the door again, and this time it was not Varys' hush but Sansa's lightness and hesitation. She stood just inside, her hands collected before her as if in prayer, though he knew this was a posture taught by a sharper-eyed woman. She had a robe thrown over her shift and her hair was braided loosely down her back, neat even at this hour. She had her mother's nose and a mouth that had learned to be small when men were large. She did not step forward until he turned to face her, and then she came quickly, as if she had been given permission to be his daughter again. "Father," she said, and the word was relief and rebuke and question and love all at once. "You're awake early," he said, and the foolishness of it. What else could she be? Warmed him despite himself. "I dreamed the bells," she said. "Not the real bells, the bells I think will be rung. They were too loud, as if they wanted to drown each other out. And I woke because I couldn't hear my own breathing." He did not ask about the content of the dream beyond the bells. He had learned not to ask Sansa to inventory her worries. It made them multiply. He gestured to the chair Varys had not taken. "Sit," he said. "I have not eaten. Will you have bread with me?" She smiled as if he had told a joke that made kindness of a poor morning. "I would, father," she said. and kept her hands on her knees so he would not see that they trembled. He poured water and broke a heel of bread. They ate in the quiet between them until Sansa could not keep words caged any longer. "Will it be terrible?" she asked in a rush. "Will we be booed? I know people sometimes boo. I heard a man boo on feast day because his wife burned onions. He laughed, but it was still a boo. Will they do that at the September when—" She looked at the table rather than finish. He felt her struggle with what to call the thing. "They will not boo," Ned said. "They will make a noise that tries to be many other noises. People try to talk all at once when they do not know a single word to use. The bells will drown some of it. The rest you will ignore." She worked her fingers together. "Is it truly?" she asked carefully. "The only way? Could there be another way I don't know because I'm only me?" The folk of the South expected a bargain out of the air that the North knew better than to wait for. He had expected this question from Catelyn, not from Sansa. Yet when it came from her mouth, he realized he had been carrying it around as if it belonged to everyone but himself. He set the bread down. "There are always other ways," he said. "But some of them lead to roads we cannot walk and still keep our oaths. Some of them lead to roads full of bones. This way is straight and hard and will hurt those we would protect less than the others would hurt them." "They say the queen is beautiful," Sansa said, and her voice did not fail on the word queen. Did not catch as it might have if she had tried to call that word hers 2 months ago. "She is. I've seen her. I don't. She frightens me, and also I cannot look away. When she smiles and does not mean it, I think perhaps that is what all the ladies here are taught, and I am thick as clay compared to glass." "You are not glass," he said, "nor are you clay. If anyone tries to call you one of those things, you may remind them that you are a person." She nearly smiled then. "If I reminded the queen of that, she would have me sent away." "She may attempt it," he said. "Remind me, then. I am not so far above being corrected as some imagine." Sansa's mouth softened. "Will you stand with her?" she asked, and the force beneath the simple words surprised him. "All my life I imagined a queen and a king in a hall. I never— Father, will you stand with her and not?" He reached out. For the first time that morning, he permitted himself to touch the letter with the fish seal and then put his other hand atop his daughter's. "I will stand," he said. "I will not pretend anything I am not capable of. But I will not abandon the room when it is my duty to remain." She nodded and did not cry, and he loved her for that, and also ached because she did not permit herself the relief of it. "May I sit with Lady Jane?" she asked, composure returning in little feats. "She won't boo. Her mother pinches her when she speaks too loudly in the hall. I may be pinched as well. One must share in one's friends' punishments." "Sit with whom you will," he said. "There will be a place for you. Watch everything. Do not let your eyes be led to one thing only because it is shining." "Yes, father." She stood then, smoothing her robe, looking once at the fish-sealed letter with a curiosity she had inherited from her mother. "Will you come to break your fast in the hall? The others will be there." "In time," he said. "I have things that require my hand." She hesitated and then leaned forward. He smelled soap and sleep on her. She kissed his cheek quickly and was gone. He sat rather than stood and looked again at the letter that Varys had said would open under its own weight. He moved it from one side of the table to the other. He did this not to make himself laugh at his own foolishness, but because it helped for things to change place even if their meaning did not. He opened another drawer and took out a smaller box. In it were a few oddments. A dirk with an antler hilt he had never used but kept because a man he'd liked had made it for him as a boy. A little clay boar with one ear nicked off, given to him by a stable lad who had later died of a cough. A strip of leather from a bridle that had broken the day he took his first fall. He touched each thing, reminded himself he had been many places that were not this one, and that a man was not only made of the decisions that had fashioned his current shape. Another knock. He was tempted to crawl into the hearth and hide there until everyone gave up on him out of respect for his commitment to absurd evasion. Instead, he said, "Enter," and watched the door open to reveal Ser Barristan Selmy. The old knight's hair was as white as the linen laid on the table, and his face was carved with honesty. He bowed to the degree appropriate to a man who recognized authority but would be no one's ornament. "My," Barristan began, and adjusted his tongue to the name he had been told to use today. "Lord, I come to ask if you will require escort to the September." "I walked to the September on the day I first came to the city," Ned said. "You were then a guest," Barristan said mildly. "Guests are watched with interest. Kings are watched with intention." "I have not been crowned," Ned replied, an old argument he could not keep from trying on again. "Nor is a blade a sword when it is on." "Ly iron," Barristan said. "And yet any man with hands can tell it will be won when hammer and heat have had their say." Ned found it both irritating and helpful when wisdom came to him in such crisp shapes. He gave the man a nod. "You will ride beside me," he said. "Not in front. I know the way." Barristan, who had spent a life standing where he was asked to stand and had learned the rare habit of questioning order without showing disrespect, cocked his head. "It will look less like a parade if we are not leading it," he said. The corner of his mouth bent nearly into a smile and then restrained itself. "There are men on the walls this morning who will count every horse and call that accounting a prophecy. Better to give them fewer horses to count." "Thank you," Ned said. "Has she asked for any special arrangement beyond what we agreed?" "She has asked for flowers in the Galilee," Barristan said, as if this were a matter of strategy. In some ways it was white ones. She said they must not smell too strongly. She does not like being reminded of funerals. Ned did not say we are all reminded of funerals whether we wish it or not. He had learned what words could be spoken in a city that did not share his sense of which facts were tender and which could be held by both hands without harm. "And the boy," Barristan blinked once. "Joffrey will stand with her and step back when the vows are spoken. His face will be watched. He knows it. He has been told to practice unconcern." "Can one practice such a thing?" Ned asked. "One practices anything a boy practices," Barristan said, and something in his eyes, a flash like a gull turning, suggested he had seen things that should have dried him and had found a way to remain flesh. "There are men who are good because they fear being seen doing wrong. There are others who are good because they could not live with themselves if they were not. The difference looks small from a distance. It is not small." "Thank you," Ned said again, discovering that gratitude did not put a dent in the weight he carried but did help him balance it. "I will send for you." When Barristan had gone, the room seemed to have reset itself around the space his body had used. Ned lifted the fish-sealed letter in his left hand and held it until the heat of his skin warmed the wax. Then he set it down. He would open it after the September, he told himself, because a man could die on a morning like this and he did not wish to die with certain words rattling in his head like a loose mantle hook. This was not logic. He did not require logic. He required a way to move his foot forward and then the other. His hand brushed the hilt of the greatsword near the hearth. Too great to wear indoors, and he paused. Ice, named in a hard country and made to keep a family's fear of forgetting at bay. Its presence here was a strangeness he had gotten used to like a scar. He could not see but touched with his mind when tired. He would not take it to the September. Some men took up more space because they carried their fathers into rooms like a ritual. He had no room for a father today. He had only room for a vow. He did not want to speak before men who would chisel it into the city's stone. He left the chambers. The hallway beyond was lit in intervals, the breath of lamps making little islands. The guards at the door stood straight, the kind of straight that told him they had questioned their lives at some point and then chosen an answer that permitted them to stand for hours without moving more than their eyes. He nodded. One blinked, the other did not, and he wondered what bargain each had made with sleep. The Red Keep at dawn was not the Red Keep later. Its stones were gray and clean of rumor. The kitchens had begun their clamor, but that clamor did not yet reverberate up through the floors to settle in men's skulls and make them irritable. He went the long way to the small yard where swordsmen practiced, his steps remembering a path he had told them to learn when he had first arrived. The yard was empty save for a single boy with a wooden blade, the very boy he had written to Bran about, who now, encouraged by failure having failed to stop him, had found a stance that made the Tulong stick a partner rather than a foe. The boy saw him and straightened, dragged the practiced sword into a salute, and nearly fell. Ned lifted a hand in return and moved on without correcting him. A king corrected boys and made them brittle. A father let them practice until their bodies told them the truth. Sunrise came in increments. First a silver along the edge of the river, then a smear on a slate roof, then the tips of the irons along the ramparts catching light as if they had been dipped. He crossed a loggia where the sea air came in unhindered, and there he found Cersei. She was alone. This did not make sense. A queen was never alone in this city unless she meant to be and had arranged for it with the care of a murderer arranging an alibi. She stood at the balustrade with both hands upon it, her knuckles pale. Her hair was unbound, a golden river heavier than silk, and the robe she wore was unbelted and fell around her like a promise not to need armor. The air tasted of salt and lemon oil. She did not look at him when he approached. She looked at the city as if it had once sworn fidelity to her and had left her for another. "My lady," he said, and the word tasted honest and wrong. "You are awake." "Unlike you," she said. "I sleep." Her voice was even. "Unlike you, I also know how to wake looking as if I have slept. A useful art. Men never appreciate it. They assume beauty is a spontaneous generosity of the gods rather than a discipline. It is well for us that men remain so charmingly unobservant. It lets us do what we want in the spaces between their applause." He waited. He had learned that to speak into her sentences was to give them, somehow, an extra edge to cut him with. "You won't ask if I intend it," she said at last, turning her head, giving him the full measure of her gaze. It had weight and distance in it like the sea looking back. "You are too polite for that and too proud. If you have come this morning to say that you do not," he said, "then I will hear it and act accordingly." She laughed very quietly. "You act as if the world will rearrange itself because your jaw clenched in a different way. It's engaging. You will be a very dull king if you try to impose that on everything. You will be an interesting one if you realize the city has its own will." She took her hands off the balustrade and studied them as if they were evidence. "I have not been alone since I was 12, she said, and for a moment he saw that girl standing to one side of a room where men had been measuring one another with glances and had not measured her at all. Then the moment passed. "I came here because I prefer the taste of salt to the smell of incense. The September smells like men pretending to be good." "You chose it," Ned said. "You asked for the September and the High Septon's blessing." She made a little face that did not disturb the elegance of her features. "I asked for it because this is how one keeps a thing from being declared a sin. Do not mistake my compliance for reverence. I bow to what will keep my children safe. I would bow to the wind if that would do it." Her eyes changed. "Will you stand them beside me?" "They will sit with you," he said. "They will not stand for the vows. The boy will not be asked to lend a face to the thing being done." "You mean he is not to be made a prop," she said. "That is what you are thinking in your noble brain. Prop, what a simple word. He has been used, Lord Stark, by men who wanted his eyes to give them the look of legitimacy. You also will use him if you must. Learn to love your need of him. It will keep you honest." He met her gaze and did not look away. "Your children will be safe," he said. "From swords?" she asked. "You can move swords with a word. I believe you and I admire it as a trick. From whispers, from truths laid out like traps, from themselves." She stepped closer, not enough to be mistaken for intimacy, but enough that the lemon oil and the warmth of her could reach him even in the morning air. "You will keep them alive. I would have kept them kings. Do not pretend there is no difference. It is not a small thing to be alive," he said. "No," she agreed. She looked past him to the east, gauging the light as if it were an adversary that must be met at the right angle. "Tell me, do you expect me to loathe you?" "I expect you to be what you are," he said. "I expect you to measure me. I expect you to remember anything I allow you to see and weaponize it. I expect to underestimate you if I am careless. I expect you to protect your children with a ferocity that would make a mountain cat ashamed. "And will you expect me to lie with you and make you a brood?" she asked, so flatly it was almost gentle. He did not move. A gull cried, "I do not expect what is not part of the bargain." She let out a breath he realized had been held a long time. "Good," she said, and for a heartbeat the word had no edge at all. "That bargain is a truer thing than most vows spoken under any roof. In time, the city will pressure us to produce something that looks like proof that our union is more than a rumor of ink. We will manage their expectations with appearance and schedule and a series of rooms with doors that make the right sounds when they are shut. You will cultivate the habit of dismissing servants loudly. I will cultivate laughter. Men will be relieved by the possibility that we have not redefined marriage for them. The faith wishes the appearance of rectitude," she finished for him. "I will give it to them. I am good at appearances. You are good at the substance that makes them necessary." He should have hated the all of her in that moment. He found that he did not. He found that he hated the shape of the world that had forced them onto the same road and told them to walk side by side as if they had chosen it for love. "The children will keep their names," he said. "The children keep everything I can make them keep," she said. "They keep their colors, their banners, their tutors, their histories. They will attend your councils when they are old enough to not ask their questions out loud. Joffrey will be difficult. He will not be more difficult than he has been, and he might, should his vanity be fed the right food, find a way to live in a garden without declaring himself its master. Tommen will be pliable until he is not. Myrcella will wound you by making you wish she had been born in a time that deserved her. I tell you this so you cannot later say you were surprised." "Thank you," he said, and the words were sincere. "So," she said, as if drawing a curtain over an uncomfortable scene, "we marry in a few hours. I will wear white because a queen must affront truth now and then to remind it that it does not actually rule. You will wear—" She glanced at his clothing and allowed one eyebrow the dignity of rising. "You, that will reassure the smiths and irritate the goldsmiths. Lord Tywin will approve of you irritating goldsmiths. He prefers his craftsmen dull and his enemies shiny. My brother will stand where he has been told to stand and try not to show his boredom. Lord Peter will smirk. The spider will blink. The old man with the beard will cough and call it piety. And you, Lord Stark, will take a breath when the vows are asked, and you will think of the weirwood at home, and you will decide to remain as clean as you can be while still wearing a crown." He did not ask how she knew any of this. She did not ask how he would stand it. This was their bargain too, what not to ask. She began to walk, and he fell in beside her because it was easier than standing and because walking had always helped him think. She slowed once to look at a little plant that had found a crack in the stone of the balustrade and grown there, stubborn as any Northland weed. She touched it delicately. "People like to think resilience is noble," she said. "It is also annoying. This thing will pry apart the whole wall if no one notices it in time. Then someone should lift it out," he said. "Should they?" She smiled, almost merrily, and left the plant alone. They parted at the archway leading back into the main corridors. She did not bow. He did not. The respect they were to show each other would be performed later, with witnesses. Alone, they had given something else that would count and leave no marks. The corridors filled. Servants went by in groups, a flock of whispers and rustling cloth. Somewhere a door shut and a woman cried out in surprise and then laughed. And Ned realized with a jolt that there were still people in this place who experienced their mornings without calculation. He wondered how long it would be before he made even those laughters sound like rehearsals. He went to the chambers of the hand because those were still, for the last part of a morning, his chambers, and because a man ought not float between rooms like a confused ghost. The fish-sealed letter had not moved. This comforted him beyond reason. He put his hand on it and finally broke the wax. The paper inside was not long. Catelyn's hand was clean and strong. No tremors, no blots. He read, and every line was as he feared and as he hoped. She did not beg him to return. She did not accuse him of betraying her to a southern plot. She did not pretend either that his choice could be passed off as a small matter of state. She wrote his name first, then she wrote their children's names after it, and under those she wrote the word duty, and then she scratched it out and wrote love. She told him that in the Godswood, when she stood in front of the heart tree, she had been angry, but she had discovered that anger in front of a white face with red eyes felt like a performance no one would applaud. She wrote that she had laid her hand on the bark and felt the cold move into her palm. She wrote that the cold had told her nothing. She wrote that silence was sometimes an answer and sometimes an absence. She wrote that she could not tell him to do what she would do because she did not own his soul. She wrote that she would keep their children as if keeping a fire in a hearth with damp wood. She wrote that she would count the ravens until counting drove her mad, and then she would learn not to count. She wrote that if he must do this, he must do it without thinking of himself as capable of purity, that such a thought would ruin him. She wrote that there would be a room at Winterfell where he could come back to himself when the time came, and that she would not change the placement of his boots in it for all the years he was gone. He read it twice, then folded it as precisely as he could and tucked it with the oddments in his small box. He exhaled and found that his chest could expand a little more than it had. He picked up the letters to his sons and held them to be sent. He had not put the seal down before Arya came. She did not knock. She came like a burst and then stopped because the sight of a father with letters in his hand demanded a different speed. Her hair was not tied, and she had a streak of flour on her cheek, and her eyes were too awake for the hour. "You will not make me wear a ribbon," she said by way of greeting. "Good morning to you," he said, the corner of his mouth traitorously beginning to lift. "I stole a roll," she announced, "from a baker who was delighted to be robbed as long as I ran well. I ran well. Then you may repeat the theft. It is not theft if the guilt is a delight." She blinked, processing a father's logic against the city's. "He said I ran like a boy," she said, waiting perhaps for him to tell her whether that was praise or insult. "You ran like Arya," he said. "That is the best a person can run." Her chin came up in a motion that made something tighten in him with pride and fear. "I will not sit near ladies who whisper. I will sit where I can see your face when you say the words. If I am given a seat where I cannot, I will move. If someone takes my arm, I will bite it." "Do not bite anyone," he said. She considered. "If someone bites me first, then you may take a finger as tax," he said, and she grinned. And for an instant the room was his again rather than the city's. Her gaze slid to the box on the table, and she walked to it like a cat, touching the carved edge with a sharp finger. "Is that from Mother?" "Yes." "Did she say to come home?" "She said to stand as I am," he said. "She said to come home when it is time." Arya absorbed this as if absorbing a blow and a caress. She nodded once, crisp, and then opened the door and vanished without saying farewell, because she could not endure the ceremony of a goodbye when she knew it would land in her chest and bruise. He sent the letters. He watched from the window as the boy with the satchel took them, swore, and walked away at a trot that would become a run as soon as he reached the stairs. A raven would be waiting in the rookery. He trusted the old man there to tie knots and stroke wings and set the birds loose with the seriousness of a priest. The sky received messengers with equanimity. It did not care what they carried. When he turned back from the window, Littlefinger was seated in the chair where Varys had not allowed himself to sit. Lord Peter's smile was something Ned had learned to look at as he would look at a narrow bridge over a gorge. With caution, with the acceptance that sometimes people fell off because they had decided to admire the view rather than keep their footing. "You will be late if you wait to be asked," Peter said, and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear with a gesture that made a mockery of carelessness. "The Queen will not be late. The Queen will be early enough to make the High Septon's hands sweat. You, if you are late, will write a legend and not the kind you want written." "I will not be late," Ned said, and wondered whether everyone in this city had written that as their first morning line. Peter let his gaze roam over the table. He had a way of seeming to bless paper just by looking at it. "Letters to the north. How heavy they must feel. You are a stubborn man, Lord Stark, and I admire the role stubbornness plays in keeping certain people alive in a world that prefers flexibility. You should know that I have wagered, in 3 separate houses, that you will surprise everyone at least twice before the week is out. I hope you wasted your silver, Ned said. On the contrary, Peter returned cheerfully. I intend to donate my winnings to the poor, by which I mean the poorer version of myself tomorrow morning. He is in such need. Why are you here? Ned asked, not unkindly, for to be unkind was to let Peter make a performance of being injured, and that performance had a way of enthralling audiences he did not wish to honor. I came to tell you that the steps of the September are being swept, Peter said, to spare you the embarrassment of stumbling on a clod of dirt on your way to a life of more impressive stumbles. I came to tell you that Lord Renly has written to men you do not yet know you need not trust. I came to tell you that men who have never heard of you use your name at breakfast as if it were an herb to spice their boredom. I came lastly and leastly to suggest that after the bells, during the crush, when the city attempts to kiss your new ring and breathe you in, you put your hand on the hilt of your sword and smile. It will make men feel both safe and frightened, and that balance is a very strong box to keep a realm in. I am not a man who smiles as a weapon, Ned said. Become one, Peter said. Or choose another weapon that does not alarm the faith and yet keeps you from being devoured at your first feast. A frown can be a very useful blade as well, but you have worn yours so long men mistake it for your face. Surprise them. Their surprise will make them treat you as new, and new things, unjudged things, are given space to do as they must. He stood and bowed enough to make mocking seem like etiquette. Remember what I said about the hilt. Men will put their lips near your hand today. Give them something cold to feel with their cheek. He left with his laugh wrapped tightly around him like a cloak. Ned's jaw ached. He had been clenching it again. He rolled it and winced at the crack that came from one hinge. He took a breath and held it, and did not let it out until the second bell rang. That sound filled the corridors and spilled into rooms where the sound of water and the sound of dress ties and the sound of looking had been the important sounds. The bell carried none of the Weirwood's patience. It was a southern bell, and it called men to acts with an insistence that presupposed a conclusion. He took up his cloak, the heavier one, though the air was not cold, and pinned it with the wolf. He did not look into the polished plate left for him to see himself in. If he wanted to know what he looked like today, he would look at the faces of others and read the answer there. The steps down to the yard were steeper than he remembered. Or perhaps his body was a fraction heavier with choices and the steps had not changed. Barristan waited below with a single horse and the same expression with which he might have waited for a battle line to tighten. The horse stamped once when Ned laid a hand on its neck. He mounted. A small escort fell in behind without the clamor Peter feared. The city, above them, regarded them without blinking. Windows were suddenly full of faces. A boy on a roof with an apple in his hand stopped chewing before he swallowed. Ned nodded to him. The boy did not return the nod. He leaned forward to watch the forward part of the procession as if nods were for men who had time to be seen. They rode out. The streets widened as they approached the hill where the September threw its shadow like a great, careful hand. The bells multiplied. Men could have danced to that rhythm. No one did. Flowers had been set around the broad stair, white as Cersei had requested, and they were the modest, well-behaved sort whose scent did not bully the air. The steps gleamed with morning damp and fresh sweeping. Ned heard the scratch of a final stiff brush down at the edge, and for a moment he loved the anonymous hand that had done that work so earnestly for this stranger of a morning. Folk had gathered as Varys said they would. They parted like wool when the horse came. Faces turned like flowers to the sun, tracking. Words rose and fell, too soft to make any one phrase out of them. In among the crowd, a woman laughed. Someone had told a joke. A little girl stood on her father's boot to see better, and the father never moved his foot because he knew what mattered more. Inside the September, the stone took the sound and softened it. Light pooled in the high windows and fell in gentle squares on the floor. The air did not smell of incense yet. An acolyte held a thurible in his hand, waiting for the cue he had been taught would come like a baton. The high septon stood with patience in his face and stiffness in his knees. He lifted his hands and opened his mouth, and the words that were supposed to begin such a ceremony rose toward the ceiling like a flock startled. He looked for Cersei then, and there she was, coming through the opposite entrance with her children at either flank. She wore white, and it did not look like innocence. It looked like strategy. Her hair had been bound and gathered into something almost too heavy for her head, and then softened at the ears to suggest a woman more gentle than the eyes admitted. Myrcella held herself like a lady already. Tommen blinked as if counting his breaths. Joffrey had practiced unconcern and made it into a shield. The shield had a crack. Their eyes met as she approached, and she inclined her head 1 precise degree. He answered with the same. They stood before the old man together, and the murmuring reduced itself to a hum. The High Septon asked if they would be joined for the good of the realm. He asked if they would keep the peace between houses with their bodies as a bridge. He did not ask if they loved. He did not ask if they forgave. He did not ask if they would suffer. Those questions were for private rooms and gods who listened in woods. Ned spoke the words that had been decided upon, and his voice did not fail him. He placed his palm over hers when told to, and her skin was warm. She spoke her part, and in it he heard iron and calculation and, unexpectedly, a note like the one a woman makes when a child stirs in its sleep and she thinks she has woken it and is angry with herself for that tenderness. The High Septon pronounced what needed to be pronounced. The bells outside shifted their pattern and, as if the city had been holding a breath alongside him, the air came back into the room. They turned together then and faced the same direction for the first time. The faces looking back were an orchard of opinions. Some men smiled the way men smile when a debt has just been forgiven. Some smiled as if their enemy had stepped on a rake. Some did not smile at all because their faces would keep the truth better if they did not teach them that trick. Ned saw Sansa beside a friend and allowed himself the smallest dip of his chin. She reached and gripped her friend's fingers so hard the other girl winced, and then they both seemed to find that pain very proper. He saw Arya perched on a low rail as if she had been allowed to be a gargoyle. She made a face at him that was both defiance and blessing. He saw Peter and Varys and Barristan with his stillness, and he did not look for Jaime, and he did not look for the absence behind that not looking. They stepped forward to receive the public's approval, which in this civilization consisted of noise and hands and eyes and the thurible finally swinging, the smell of incense blooming like a forest that had decided to walk into a room. It washed over him with the sea, the lemon oil, the sweat of a man who had ridden hard to be here and now was bored. Joffrey shifted and created a pause in the atmosphere around him. People did not like to see boys work to keep their faces. Myrcella's gaze went soft when she looked at him, and he felt something in himself decide to endure. Tommen rubbed his palms down the front of his little tunic, as if to erase something the cloth had whispered to him. Then they were past the worst of it, and he stood in the Galilee where the flowers did their best to remain modest, and the sun had found its way into the air at last, and something like ordinary time attempted to resume. Cersei leaned toward him as if to say something that could not be said out in the nave. Her voice, when it came, was very low and very even. "We are now a piece of architecture," she said. "Men will walk through today as if it were part of the city they have always known. Do not try to be a tour guide. Be the wall." He thought of the little plant prying apart the stone. "Walls are undone by what no one notices," he answered. "Then notice everything," she said, and let his arm go. He did not realize he had been holding his breath again until he caught himself needing to swallow. There were handshakes to suffer, and well-wishers to nod to, and men who wished to tell him stories about their grandfather's views on mixed marriages. There were women who looked past him to measure Cersei's expression and adjust their own. There was a priest who spoke so softly that Ned had to lean down and in so doing made the chapel seem, for a second, intimate as a cottage. Near the door, Sansa caught his sleeve without the world noticing. "You didn't stumble," she whispered. "I thought perhaps you would stumble on purpose, to make them laugh. I'm glad you did not." "Thank you," he said, perfectly solemn. Arya passed behind them at a trot, her hair slipping its ribbon. "They were bored," she announced, pleased. "I was not," and she fled before Sansa's correction could catch her. Outside, the day had decided to be a day. The terraces were bright with movement. Somewhere a pipe began to play and someone clapped because clapping is a way to turn fear into a noise that looks like joy. Ned stepped into that brightness and felt it lay its weight upon him like a new cloak. Beside him, Cersei lifted her chin so that the sun would strike her hair and make those who had come to see a queen receive their queen. They climbed into the carriage because it would have been a kind of war not to. He had not wanted it. She had insisted, and he had chosen to yield in places where yielding did not ask him to sell a part of himself he could not live without. Inside it was cooler. The curtains were tied back and the city flowed around them like a river. Cersei sat with her hands palm down on the cushion beside her, her fingers long and idle. "I had a dream last night," she said, as if discussing the worth of a horse. He did not invite it and did not stop it. "I dreamed," she said, "that Robert was alive and we were married and you were a guest in my hall, and I laughed at something you said because it made him jealous, and he drank, and I watched him drink and thought, not I wish him dead, not I wish him changed, but simply I wish to be somewhere else. And then the room widened and became a road and I walked on it, and both of you stayed where you were and complained that I had taken the better shoes." She turned her face to the passing buildings. "Dreams are a very foolish architecture. Yet whenever I have dreamed of being a queen, I have woken to find it so. Beware the times I dream of being content." He could have told her that contentment, in his experience, was not something one could order even from a very accommodating God. He did not. He watched the city instead because she had told him to notice everything and because he had already decided he would prefer to surprise it by paying attention rather than be surprised by it not having been done. There was a boy in a doorway with a carved mast in his hand, and he held it up as they passed, a salute from the alley. There were two women arguing about a piece of fabric, the argument so old it had become a comfort, and they stopped arguing when the carriage went by and then resumed with more vigor, as if blessed by the proximity of power. There was a man who did not look at them at all because he had scratched his arm and found a new worry there. There were 100 little lives doing what lives do, indifferent to the shapes of crowns above them unless those shapes cast a shadow. By the time they reached the Red Keep again, the day had grown teeth. Men who had slept lightly the night before were now awake and wanted to say what they had held back in the line outside the September. He endured it with a grace that was not his gift but had been lent to him by the thought of his daughter's fingers gripping her friend's hand. He held his hand as Peter had suggested and did not grip the hilt, but let his knuckles brush the cold so men would imagine steel where they could not see it. He smiled once, at a child who stared very hard, and the smile went through the room like swallows through a barn. In the great hall they received. The chairs had been arranged so that the arrangement told a story of who mattered. The story would be debated later and refined. Today it would satisfy no one and offend everyone perfectly. Cersei sat with her body at an angle that made one shoulder more true than the other. He sat without angles. They heard oaths. They heard compliments. They heard a man tell a tale so long that his wife, standing 2 feet behind him, went to sleep on her feet, woke and went to sleep again, a feat that made Ned like her beyond reason. When the line had thinned and the courtiers were occupied with measuring each other's jewels and ambition, Cersei leaned to him and said, "You will not do something foolish today. Promise me that small mercy." "I have never promised a queen anything," he said. "You have made promises to a woman," she replied. "If it pleases you to think of me as one of those when I ask for a slight protection, I will not correct you." He found that he could say, "I will try," and feel it sit in his mouth like something honest. "Good," she said, and swept her gaze along the hall to catch a man who had been trying not to be caught. He bowed, flustered into charm. At last the hall released them. At last he was permitted to stand in a smaller room where the air had not been taught to perform. He could not call it peace. It was only the absence of noise with the memory of noise imprinted on the fabric of the tapestries. He stood with his back to the hearth, his hands behind him, fingers interlaced to keep them from reaching for anything. Out the window, the day had settled into its routine. The city had accepted the new piece of architecture and begun to hang its laundry around it. There was work waiting. There were decisions about guard rotations, about the disposition of ships at anchor, about what to do with a man who had been caught shaving coins. about who would deliver a message to a house that disliked its messages hand-delivered. There were ravens to read, some bringing congratulations, some bringing the careful absence of congratulations that meant more than the other kind. There were quiet men who would ask to be allowed to leave the city, and one loud one who would insist on staying. There was, somewhere in the keep, a little plant prying at stone with a blade-soft root. There was salt drying on the windowsill. There was lemon oil on the wood of a woman's brush. He took a breath, let it out, and called to the guard at the door to send in the steward. He sent for Sansa as well, and for Arya and for Barristan. He sent for a man from the granaries. He sent for the boy from the yard with the wooden sword. He sent for no one who wanted to see a crown up close, which limited the crowd. He would walk through the next hour with his feet on the ground, even if the ground had been taught to tilt. He thought of the gods would in winter. The way silence, there was not emptiness but presence. He thought of a letter from a woman who had not tried to save him from himself, not because she could not, but because she had chosen to let him be accountable to the man she had agreed to love. Under the new weight, he arranged his back and found, to his surprise, that it did not break. He was not comfortable. He did not expect to be. He was steady. That would do. And so the first hour of a day that would be told 100 ways by men who had not lived it ended in the prosaic shape of a man asking for a ledger, of a queen arranging her hair in a mirror where she permitted no one to stand behind her, of a city deciding, as cities do, that it would continue. The steward who came in with his ledger had hands like bird bones and ink in the lines of his knuckles. He made a little bow that tried to be practiced and almost was, and set the book down as if it weighed more than it should. Barristan stood to one side, unintrusive as a candlestick, and the boy with the wooden sword, summoned and then arriving with surprised terror, hovered by the door with the blade held wrong because it had suddenly become a passport into rooms he did not think he should enter. "Place it there," Ned said, and the steward opened the ledger in the middle rather than the front, which told him as much about the present state of things as any number recorded within. The sums pooled and eddied as if made of water. Debts owed by the crown to names written more carefully than the names of those who owed the crown. Strokes of quill that had tried to turn a promise into a number and then had given up to become a flourish instead. He read and felt the familiar heaviness take its place between his shoulder blades, the weight of responsibility for small, precise things. "The bakers," the steward ventured, pointing with a finger he tried to keep from trembling, "say that if the price of flour is not set by someone with the right ring on his hand, they will be forced to set it themselves, and then men will come with cudgels to tell them they have chosen poorly. They prefer rings to cudgels. Set a fair price," Ned said, "with guards to watch the collections and not skim them. The guild will cry if a coin lands 2 inches to the left of its bowl. But the city will bleed if bread is priced for the tables that already have meat on them." "Yes, my lord," the steward said, and then, as if he had been told to try out a new word when alone and had discovered he liked its shape enough to attempt it in company, "Your Grace." Ned did not correct him. He turned a page and found a line of numbers that tried to hide under the line above. "Who owes this?" he asked. The steward leaned close, lips moving with the figures, and then came to the name. "House Lannister," he said, and looked ashamed as if he had confessed to a shame that wasn't his. "No, forgive me, this is the other side. The crown owes House Lannister. Accrued. One does not notice the weight of snow until a roof sags." "Snow is honest," Ned said. "It shows itself. Write a clean statement of total debt and to whom. I want the truth in one sheet, not scattered through a book like seeds thrown for birds who haven't the sense to find them. I will, your grace." Ned closed the ledger. "Send bread to Fishmonger's Square. Not a show, not crusts, loaves, and make sure the men who carry them know they are to keep the cloaks of the watch between them and anyone who wants more than their share. Men need to see we remember there are mouths that speak without titles." "Yes," the steward said, his eyes warming with the relief of a man given a task that looked like something a person could do. "Go," Ned said, and the steward bowed himself out, clutching the book like a priest clutching a text in a storm. He looked then to the boy by the door. The wooden blade had a nick in it that told a story of a hard lesson on a stone edge. "Your name," Ned said. Pate, the boy said, and then quicker. Pate, son of Pate, from the brick yards by the river gate. Because men loved to offer names as elaborate as they had. You were in the yard this morning, Ned said. You found a way to hold a thing that didn't want to be held that way. The boy's face spoke the fear men carried into rooms where they did not recognize the furniture. I tried, your lord, Ned said, not to correct but to simplify. Yes, the boy said. My lord, you will present yourself to the master-at-arms, Ned continued, and tell him your hand has been called steady. He will laugh. When he has finished laughing, he will give you a blade trimmed to your reach and teach you how to keep your feet. You will not thank me for this. You will thank your body when it is strong. Pate's mouth fell open around a word he could not shape and then closed. He nodded, too quickly, and nearly forgot his blade as he started to go. He remembered it, clutched it like a friend, and fled. Sometimes, Barristan said after the door had closed, the smallest acts are the ones a city remembers when it must decide if it loves its king. I am not yet king, Ned answered. You looked like one then, Barristan said, and did not make a display of it. The man from the G. Rhaenyra's arrived, with a face like a split apple and a stance that said he had spent a life convincing men not to steal one handful too many. He spoke of stores, of caravan schedules, of a shipment slowed by a wheel broken on the river road. He spoke of rats. He spoke of men who looked like rats and chewed as eagerly. Ned listened. He sent the man away with orders that would keep the city from gnawing itself for another week. When the room at last had only the old night and the quiet in it, Ned allowed his shoulders to fall an inch. You have the look, Barristan said, of a man who would rather mend a roof than build a palace, Ned replied. I do not know how to be admired for what I do not admire in myself. Very few know how to bear admiration, Barristan said. Those who show great ease at it are often those who have replaced their true face with the mask men prefer to praise. Will you stand with me when Lord Tywin arrives? Ned asked because it would be worse not to ask. I have stood with many men, Barristan said gently. I will stand with you. I will pray that this is not an old habit of mine trying to dress itself up as loyalty. That is more honesty than most men give in a day, Ned said. I am old, Barristan returned. We do not have time for lies, not even the kind that keep a hall courteous. A knock that was not a knock, an insistence choosing politeness like a pair of shoes, came at the door and Renly Baratheon entered. He never looked as if he had walked from one room to another. He looked as if the rooms had aligned themselves to his stride. Handsome in a way that made men feel less threatened than they should. Clean-shaven and bright as a polished buckle, Renly bowed with all the grace of a man who had been taught early the value of a well-timed concession. Brother, he said, and then, a beat later, Your Grace. Renly could move his tongue faster than most men switched horses. Lord Renly, Ned said, wary of the easy warmth. You have written letters. I write letters every day, Renly replied, taking the chair Peter had occupied earlier and making it look like it had been designed to flatter him. They keep me from saying things I do not mean. Not always. Often enough. Lord Baelish says you have written to men I do not yet know I need not trust, Ned said. Peter is a dear friend to himself, Renly said, smiling. You are wise to listen to him. You would be wiser still to remember his counsel is shaped to fit him first, as is mine, which is why I have come with mine to offer you where I can be seen shaping it. Say it, Ned said. Stannis will write as well, Renly said. He will not smile while writing, though that has never kept his ink from flowing. He will write that the law, like the mother of the gods, is stern, and that bastards are not to be crowned, and that a marriage between you and my sister-in-law, the widow of my late brother, is as unnatural as a wolf in a rose garden. I know the law, Ned said. I do not know how well the law knows the city when it is hungry and men have swords. Then allow me to introduce them, Renly said lightly. The law believes it is a helm that makes a head invulnerable. The city believes it is a cup that, if smashed, will splash everyone. I propose we give them both less to argue over. Call a great council. Invite the high, the loud, the stubborn. Let them see the shape of what must be done and, if necessary, take some of the credit for it. And what shape do you favor? Ned asked. He could feel Barristan's attention sharpen without turning his head. Renly's gaze went, for a heartbeat, to the small box on the table as if letters carried scent, and then back to Ned's face. The shape that spares us from Stannis, he said. He is not wrong, but he is Stannis. He would make the realm a ledger. Men do not love a ledger. They respect it, and they are careful with it, but no one sings to a ledger in the evening and thanks it for its beauty. You would sing to a crown, Ned said. I would give it a face men liked looking at, Renly answered, which is half of keeping a realm together until it learns to do it without looking. You have even drawn out a line of succession already, I suppose, Ned said. I do not claim the drawings are not flattering, Renly admitted, but I do not come only for myself. Your marriage, our queen's marriage, has made a space where before there was only a hole men feared to step into. In that space, you may call something stable into being. And I, he smiled with too many teeth to be entirely harmless. I would stand at your right and make sure no one mistakes the shape of your crown for uncertainty. The Tyrells know how to make a field flower even in poor soil. They wish to help. They have a daughter. The realm is not a garden, Ned said. And I have married. Renly lifted his hands, palms out. I have not come to marry anyone, he said. Not today. I have come to offer you the numbers to match Peter's numbers. Food, ships. The Reach can feed 3 King's Landings if properly asked. Make it clear that you are not a northern storm that will blow away all that is familiar. Show them a table set with bread. Ned thought of the steward's ink-stained hands. He thought of white flowers at the September whose scent had been selected not to offend. Summon the council, he said. We will speak in the small room with the carpet that eats men's words. Bring Peter. Bring Varys. Pycelle will arrive without being brought and cough until he is comfortable. We will decide how to answer Stannis when his letter comes. Renly stood, bowing as if he had received a favor. It will come, he said cheerfully. Men with great certainty cannot help but send their certainty into the world, lest it wake them at night and demand to be let out. He paused by Barristan. Sir, my compliments on your continued capacity to look honorable in unhonorable rooms. It is a trick I learned from watching men much younger than you fail at it, Barristan said, which Renly, to his credit, took as a benediction rather than a cut. When he had gone, the room settled. Ned pinched the bridge of his nose the way he had when the boys were small and noisily attempted to share a single wooden horse. You will not be given a moment, your... Barristan caught himself carefully. Lord, not until you make one. Then make me one, Ned said. Stand at the door and tell anyone who arrives without blood already on their hands that they must learn to wait. Barristan did not hesitate. He made himself into a door in a manner that gave no offense and suffered none. Alone at last for as long as a man's patience could be counted, Ned went to the narrow window and put his palm against the stone. It was already warm where the sun had pressed. He closed his eyes, not to pretend there was a gods would hear with a face to listen, but to reduce the world to the size of his breathing for a handful of heartbeats. In another part of the castle where a mirror had been obliged to work since dawn, Cersei Lannister sat while a woman drew a brush through her hair. It made a sound like silk pulled through a ring. Myrcella stood on a stool beside her, watching with the solemnity of girls taught early the importance of small perfections. Does it hurt? Myrcella asked, when the brush snagged a little and the woman apologized as if she had nicked a queen with a knife. Everything that makes men look at you with admiration hurts, Cersei said. Smile when it pulls. It will confuse them. I don't want to confuse them, Myrcella said, earnest as a prayer. Then you will be eaten, Cersei said. She touched her daughter's cheek with a knuckle. But not today. Today you will stand and be a daughter who has seen a queen be a wall. That is a lesson you will not learn from a Septa's book. Joffrey came without knocking, trailing Sandor Clegane like a shadow that had learned to be sarcastic. He had a new cut on the side of his hand that he tried not to show. Boys do not realize men see everything because they have not learned yet where men are always looking. You made us bow to him, Joffrey said.
No courtesy.
He had kept the words under his tongue until they burned. I made you stand beside me, Cersei said, and I made you step back at the right moment. I made you a prince whose face was not being asked to lie for anyone. That is more freedom than most princes enjoy. He is, Joffrey faltered. Words failed him not because there were none, but because the ones he wanted tasted too much like the ones he had overheard and had not been permitted to repeat. He is not a king. He is a wolf who has put on a crown. He has put on a room, Cersei said reasonably, and filled it with things that will eat him if he does not learn where to place his feet. You will learn with him. You will learn faster than he does. That is the advantage of watching, if you are a boy with the patience to do it. I am not a boy, Joffrey said too quickly, and Sandor's mouth bent. Just slightly. In amusement he never would have permitted himself had his helm been down. Then you must decide, Cersei said, turning her head a fraction to make the woman with the brush freeze in place. Whether you wish to be a man who needs to be the only light in a room or a man who understands rooms are built with windows and doors. There are men who mistake torches for power. They set everything near them on fire and then call the light proof of their strength. Do not be that man. He looks beautiful and dies hungry. I hate him, Joffrey said, half to his hands. Good, she said, and meant it. Hatred sharpens, but do not let it be the only knife you carry. It is a knife that turns in your own hand if you forget to look at it while you use it. Her gaze shifted to Sandor. Keep him from making gestures today. I can keep him from making gestures, Sandor said. Words are a forest fire I cannot piss out. Then keep the branches green, she said, and Sandor huffed in what passed for assent. In the yard, she added, almost as an afterthought because to put it first would have made it seem more personal than she permitted herself. There is a man who moved his sword in a way I found almost elegant once. He will be summoned to the hall later to be thanked for standing very still and looking important. If he pauses by the door and gives you a look like a father telling a son something the son does not wish to hear, you will not sneer. You will nod. Learn it. Now. Joffrey blinked and looked properly confused for the first time that morning. Whom? He asked. Ser Barristan Selmy, she said. Think of honor for once in your life without immediately trying to turn it into a weapon. When they were gone, Myrcella put her hand, very carefully, on her mother's sleeve. Am I to be eaten? She asked. So solemnly Cersei felt something in herself die and something else. Steel, perhaps, spring up to substitute. No, she said, and this was the only lie she would tell this hour. You will be fed. I will see to it. In a courtyard the sun had not yet adopted, Arya Stark stood in front of a man from another world who had taught her to see that every world thinks itself central to every other. Syrio Farrell's hair was thinning, but his pride was not, and his stick, a thing to laugh at until it had corrected you for the 10th time, whistled lightly as it cut the air and then tapped her calf. Water, he said, not stone. I am water, Arya said, and then, because he had taught her to tell the truth when her mouth got ahead of her feet. Sometimes I am a stone that wants to be water. Then be the stream that turns a wheel, Syrio said. Do not try to be the ocean. It does not yield and cannot enter a crack. The cracks need you. She darted left, anticipating the way he used the morning sun to steal the sight from her right eye, and he answered as he always answered. Not with the trick she expected, but with the correction she hadn't considered.
Top.
Her wrist.
Top.
The back of her knee.
Top.
The shoulder she forgot was part of her arm. You will go to the September? He asked, as if inquiring about whether. I already did, she said. They didn't boo. Of course they did not. Men do not boo without the safety of a crowd of other men ready to take the first stone. Joffrey looked bored, Arya said. Sansa looked like she had swallowed a seed and was pretending she didn't hope it would grow into something pretty. Father looked, she thought. Syrio waited. He looked like when he sees a wound that has to be stitched right away. Not the face he makes during the stitching. The one he makes when he looks at the needle and the thread and knows it's going to hold or it's going to fail, and it will be his fault if it does. Syrio smiled very slightly. You see, this is good. Seeing is how one survives long enough to have to decide whether survival is worth the cost. She lowered her stick and he punished her for it with a light rap to the knuckles. Up, he said, and she raised it again. And the dance continued until the shadows had moved from one flagstone to another, and the sound of a bell somewhere told the city to pretend it had always intended to move at this pace. In the small council chamber, the chairs sat like a lesson in where to place one's enemies. Peter had chosen one with a view of everyone's hands. Varys had chosen one with a wall at his back. Pycelle had spread himself with the care of a man who wanted to own the table without having to carry it. Renly made a point of taking the chair that would be most inconvenient to anyone who wished to watch Cersei's profile and divine from it her inner weather. He had a gentle talent for irritations that made a man angry later, when he had time to review and choose what to be angry about. Cersei entered last, not late, with a quill already in her hand, though she did not write. Ned took the chair at the head and felt the wood test him like a horse measuring a rider. "A letter from Dragonstone," Varys said before the taste of courtesy could settle. He laid it on the table like a fish that might yet bite. The seal was broken. Men like Varys broke seals the way other men breathed. Ned took it and read. There was not a flourish in it anywhere. Stannis's words marched like soldiers on a road, neither brooking nor requiring applause. He wrote of law, of rights, of an abomination corrected by proclamation. He wrote of bloodlines as if they were stone walls. He wrote that he would be merciful until he had reason not to be. He wrote that mercy would end at the moment it should, and not a heartbeat later. He wrote that the realm should not be asked to pretend about anything. He did not ask, he told. The paper seemed to grow heavier as Ned held it. "He will send others," Renly said, as if reading over Ned's shoulder, though he did not lean. "And he will send men to Raven's Teeth, to Storm's End, to every keep where there is a habit of taking orders quickly." "And he is not wrong," Peter said, smiling as if the taste of the words pleased him. "Bastardy is a cold word. It chills a room when you drop it." Cersei turned her quill point down on her thumb and drew a little dot of pain. She watched the blood come with more interest than she had shown the letter. "He will find the ears that prefer his tone," she said. "They will be near the places where the grain is measured and the walls are counted for cracks at night. They will be in the halls of men who have not learned the pleasure of applause." "He names himself king?" Ned asked quietly, though he had seen the signature. "Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, by right of law next heir and rightful king." "He names himself what the law names him," Pycelle wheezed, enjoying the opportunity to instruct. "The laws of inheritance, older than you, older than me, are not windows to be opened when a man desires a breeze. They are walls." "Walls fall," Cersei said without looking at him. "Walls fall," Peter echoed. "But they make a delicious noise while doing it. Lord Stannis is not a man to be swayed by the song of a crumbling wall," Varys said softly. "He would stand in the dust and make a list of the stones. Then we will not sing to him," Ned said. He laid the letter down so that the others could see the flatness of its statements without the tilt of his hand influencing them. "We will call a great council." Renly made a triumphant, small gesture with his eyebrows and then tamed it into an expression of bland support. "An excellent idea," he said lightly, too lightly, which made the words seem less like his plan than like a solution falling from a shelf at precisely the right time. Pycelle coughed a thought into being. "A great council, your grace, is not a letter sent on a whim. It is an invitation to a quarrel. It will bring men who answer slowly and think too quickly. Invite them," Ned said. "Let the realm choose to stand on ground it has been shown rather than imagine ground under fog. Let the High Septon set his seal. Let the River Lords and the Storm Lords and the North and the West and the Reach send their loudest. And if they choose not you?" Peter asked lazily, examining his nails, as if curious what dirt ambition moved. "Then the realm will have prevented a war I do not wish to fight," Ned said. "If this room is only a room because men agree to call it one and not a closet, then let them name it so. I will keep order until they arrive and keep their hands from one another's throats while they speak." You will be overruled by men who have never slept in your weather, Cersei said, not in argument but in warning. They will decide a thing for you and then expect you to thank them for the favor. I have been overruled by winter, Ned said. It does not require thanks. It requires roofs to be mended and stores to be kept. I can do what is in front of me even when a council refuses me a crown. Peter's smile deepened. How admirably unmarketable, he said. Men like to be sold their comforts, my lord. They like to be told a thing they already believed and to be given permission to pretend it was a new thought. You will not always be permitted the clean duty of a ledger. Then we will dirty our hands and wash them at night, Ned said. Your numbers, Lord Peter. How many ships can you make appear in the bay in 2 weeks that do not belong to men who will later ask to be paid twice what they are worth? He looked to Renly before Peter's mouth could shape an answer. And the reach. How much grain can be moved without starving Old Town's bakers? The ships, Peter said, putting on the face of a man who must be coaxed into generosity, can be rented with money we do not have from men we cannot afford to owe favors to. I will arrange it because I prefer to keep the city fed and discontent dull rather than sharp, but the price will prick. As for grain, Lord Renly lifted a hand and counted on his fingers in a way that looked like a bard's flourish and was actually the mental habit of a steward. Enough to make the dockside less crowded with anger, he said. Not enough to make men in the hills complain they have been forgotten. The Tyrells will be delighted to show themselves magnanimous. They will also wish to be seen. Let them within reason. Varys, Ned said. The gold cloaks. With whom do they sup? With whoever buys the next meal, Varys said mildly. Lord Peter has been generous. Janos Slynt is a man who has learned how to be grateful without being loyal. It is a skill rewarded often in this city. We will not keep a man who confuses his purse with his oath, Ned said. Find me another to stand at the head of the watch. One who remembers that a cloak is not only gold by color. Such men are thin on the ground, Varys said, and did not argue. Pycelle, Ned said. Send to the wall. There has been no message in too long. I want to know what becomes of Benjen Stark. Pycelle's beard seemed to gather itself into a pause. The Night's Watch do not trouble the crown unless they must. They prefer to believe their duty is beneath the notice of those who wear the higher duties. They are wrong, Ned said. Send. I will, Pycelle conceded, and took a note with the dignity of a man who believed his parchment was a part of the foundation of the realm. And the coronation, Cersei said, drawing the topic like a blade from under the tablecloth. You cannot allow them to meet in a room to decide your title while you sit without one. The city will call you names behind your back, and they will be different names depending on which street you are walking along. Choose what they must call you to your face. After Lord Tywin arrives, Ned said, I will not crown myself before a father who must be told the covenant that keeps his grandchildren safe has been sealed. That father will bring the West with him and try to seat it on your neck, Cersei said. Better to have a crown to keep it from cutting skin. I will not insult him, Ned answered. We all pretend we honor things for honor's sake. Sometimes it helps to actually honor them. The old men remember. Pycelle looked very pleased with this talk of old men. Renly rolled his eyes so minutely it was almost art. Peter yawned into the back of his hand. Varys blinked, and in the blink Ned glimpsed the calculation that never ceased. The abacus behind those soft lids clicking beads from one expectation to another. Then we adjourn, Ned said. Invite who must be invited to the feast. Not a riot, not a thin stew. A quiet table with enough bread to make men forget to shout. Cersei stood, laying down her quill with care. If you attempt to walk the city, she said, you will be lionized and insulted in equal measure. Choose a single street and walk it twice. Let the people see you as a pattern, not as an apparition. I will ride, Ned said, and she made a very small sound that could have been assent or could have been resignation. When they dispersed like actors leaving a stage and returning to their lives, Ned lingered in the chair and watched the light along the edge of the table change as a cloud passed overhead. A letter would go north. A letter had gone north. Another would go to Dragonstone. He would not send it with the word cousin inside or pleasantries on the season. He would send it with the word realm and the words law and peace, and with the knowledge Stannis would look at them and measure them and find them wanting and then write back with words hammered like nails. He left the chamber. In the corridor outside, Jaime Lannister leaned against a pillar in the posture of a man who would like passers-by to imagine he had grown there and could not be uprooted by any force less than a storm. His armor was not on him. He wore soft clothes that made his movements look lazier than they were. "You married my sister," Jaime said by way of greeting. "I have never had to share her with anyone I did not already share myself with. I can't recommend it." "I did what the city required of me," Ned said. Jaime's smile had an edge like a mirror with a crack one didn't see until one's knuckle came away bloody. "The city requires many things. It required me to stand near a man who burned people because their screams were more honest than the smiles their fathers had taught them. It required me to look at my sword and then look at a king and decide what the words I had sworn meant when the man who was supposed to embody them had disproved every syllable with his breath." He straightened. "I killed that king. Men named me for it. I let them, kept the dogs at bay. You? What name will you take when you do what the city requires and it does not look clean?" "I will take my own name," Ned said evenly. "I have spent a life learning to wear it." Jaime cocked his head. "I hope it falls off only seldom. My father hates stains. He pretends they can be polished out if one rubs hard enough. Some stains, I have learned, eat the cloth instead." "What do you want, Ser Jaime?" Ned asked, unwilling to be lured further into the tangle of the night's self-disgust. "To see what kind of man you become when my sister looks at you the way she looks at wolves," Jaime said. "And to tell you that if you hold a sword over my head in a hall, I will ask you to strike quickly. I am bored of being hated for the wrong reason." "Then stop providing men the right ones," Ned said. Jaime laughed, delighted in spite of himself. "I don't know that we will ever like one another," he said. "We might be honest enough to be interesting." He pushed away from the pillar and sauntered off, bringing with him the smell of leather and something like citrus, leaving behind the irritated admiration of a man who had chosen wit and found it a poorer meal than he had hoped. The afternoon lengthened. The city reduced itself to practicalities again. Carts, complaints, the knock of boots on stairs. Word came that a ship from Old Town had been caught in a contrary wind and would make the river mouth late. The quaymaster, with a sense of humor, had declared that the ship must be a lady with a mind of her own and had asked the men waiting to unload her whether they were prepared to woo. Word came that a boy had fallen into a vat of dye in the dyer's quarter and emerged blue from toe to fringe. His mother had cried with relief and then had laughed until she had frightened herself. Word came that 3 men had claimed to have seen a dragon over the bay. Word came that the 3 men had later admitted they had seen a cloud. More urgent word came from the wall. The raven was a big one, mean with its keepers until it had released the message. The parchment was rough. The hand was firm. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont did not waste ink on ornament. "Your Grace," it began, and Ned's breath caught because the bird had been sent before the letter had been sent to anyone else, before the city had decided what to call him. Mormont wrote of Benjen Stark, gone beyond with rangers and not returned. He wrote of bodies found in the snow that did not keep dead as they should. He wrote of a wildling woman who had spoken of white shadows in the trees. He wrote of wind that tasted wrong. He wrote without fear, but with urgency, and he ended it with a request. "Send men, send food, send a listening ear." Ned read it twice. He read it a third time and the room seemed to draw back, making space for the cold in the words. He sent for Barristan. He sent for Varys. He sent for Cersei, because she would have heard in an hour and he preferred to be accused of showing her too much rather than be accused of hiding what might later unmake an agreement. Cersei took the parchment and watched the script as if it were a snake. "The North loves to tell stories about its cold," she said, but she did not make it an accusation that the North had invented hardship. "The North would prefer to tell stories about a good harvest," Ned said. "We tell what keeps us in our houses at night. We cannot feed 1,000 mouths here and send another 1,000 mouths to the end of the world," Peter said when he had been fetched. They had not wanted him and yet had acquired him in the way cities acquired fleas. We can pretend to promise it. The pretending will keep them satisfied until the first storm. We will send men and grain, Ned said. Not a pretense. Not enough to hollow this place out. Enough to tell them they have a king who knows they exist. He looked at Cersei. The ravens to the keeps in the north will carry my hand with them. The Lord of Carhold has men with winter in their bones. Eastwatch can take a ship of barley without starving the men at the quays here if the Reach keeps its word. Cersei read him like a planner reads a map. Send men you trust to carry your name as well as your command, she said. Do not allow the north to hear your voice only in the mouths of those who cannot keep from spitting when they say it. Take, she said Robb's name and stopped herself. The room changed shape for a second, as if its corners had grown uncertain. He will not come south, Ned said. He will send strength when winter allows. He will hold the north when the rivers rise. The Night's Watch must know the south remembers them. Then send the one who loves you least, Cersei said thoughtfully. He will do more to prove you have not turned south than any letter. The Umbers do not mince their meat or their words. I will write to Great John, Ned said, and to Manderley, who loves feasting more than duty but will do both if you offer him a song to go with it. If he sends flour, it will be good flour. We cannot seem to be emptying our tables, Peter said. We must look fed so the city believes it will be fed. Arrange it, Ned said, not liking the taste of asking Peter to arrange anything and liking the necessity even less. But the ravens will fly before the sun is gone. They flew, ink still damp. The day slanted toward evening. Arms and candles and wine. The small feast Cersei had allowed was arranged with the kind of care that makes effort invisible. Tables set to imply abundance without excess. Music quiet enough to leave room for gossip to pursue itself without straining. Men came early so as not to seem too eager, and then apologized for their eagerness and called it loyalty. Women came wearing choices. Some in white to mock the color of the morning. Some in red to flatter the house that would not acknowledge the joke. Some in northern wool as if to remind themselves that practical cloth could survive a southern night. Ned took the high seat because not to would have been an insult to many and a relief to none. Cersei sat beside him, jewel light along her wrists like a chain she had chosen to put on. Renly told a story about a man at Storm's End who had taught a dog to fetch a hat and had then forgotten to teach it to set it down again, and the hall laughed because it was easier. Peter spoke to 3 people at once, making each of them believe he had reserves of attention for them later. Varys glowed with interest in everyone and thus told no one what he was thinking. Pycelle's beard mopped up gravy. Joffrey arrived late enough to disturb the pattern, with Sandor behind him, and took his place with an expression that suggested the meat might apologize to him for being dead. He looked at Ned once, quickly, in the way of boys who enjoy being caught at looking. Ned returned the look without weight. It was a strange intimacy, to sit with the boy who would have been a king in a life where a handful of steps had been taken differently, and to know you would be hated for the steps you had taken even as they kept a sword from his neck. Sansa sat with ladies who had learned to make their voices into bracelets, something to drape on an arm and show to advantage. Myrcella sat beside her, and the 2 girls worked carefully at friendship the way girls will, by offering each other small pieces of themselves and seeing which ones are accepted without being laughed at. Tommen ate, relieved to be permitted the simple act of chewing without it meaning anything. Arya, forbidden to sit where she might swing her legs into a lord's gown, found a place where the servants moved and the food came and went, and she watched everything and put names to the strangers as if naming them would give her power over how they might hurt her later. Syrio had told her that to name a thing is not to own it. It is to acknowledge it will continue to exist even when you blink. Midway through the bread course, a singer with a harp that had seen better strings stood and began a song that made men look at their plates because to look up would have meant meeting the eyes of their neighbors and admitting they had been caught feeling something. It was an old song with new words, about a wall and a winter, and a king who listened to the wind rather than to his own applause. It was too close to the moment to be admired. Later, men would say it had been written afterward. When the singer's final note hung and then failed, as all notes must, a messenger came, dusty and very careful not to be the center of attention. He went to Varys and whispered. He went to Peter and whispered. He waited at the back of the hall. Varys lifted his gaze to Ned, and Ned rose without the hall having yet chosen to stop speaking. He left by the small door reserved for men who prefer to spend less of their lives being watched. In the anteroom beyond, the messenger handed him a small tube with a seal that had once been red and was now a tired brown. The wax was stamped with a lion's head. "Lord Tywin," Varys said softly, and Ned broke it. The script was neat and unadorned. Lord Tywin Lannister wrote like a man restraining himself from unnecessary flourishes with a kind of pride. He acknowledged the marriage. He did not congratulate. He declared his intent to reach the city in 3 days with a small company to present himself and the larger body to remain outside the walls until told where the realm wished its weight distributed. He wrote that he would speak plain when presented with the capacity to do so without being shouted down by fools. He closed with the kind of phrase that could be called blessing or threat depending on the ears that received it. "He comes," Varys said. "He would," Cersei said behind them. She had come without her crown, a kindness to the room. She read the words and did not blink. "He will expect obeisance and respect. He will prefer fear. Do not give him fear. He thinks it his due." "Would you have me give him no respect?" Ned asked. "I would have you decide what it is you wish him to carry away from the room when he leaves it," she said. "For he will leave it. He does not sit in any room that is not his longer than he must. Make sure it is not victory. He will smell that and it will intoxicate him. He will call war a perfume." Ned looked at the letter again and saw in the measured words the man who had written them. More accurately, he saw the quiet anger contained in good penmanship. He folded it. "He will be received," he said, "and he will not be permitted to stride about the hall as if he were king." "You will not enjoy keeping him from it," Cersei said. "Enjoy it. It will be one of the few pleasures you will be given without cost in the next week." They returned to the hall. The singer had begun a broader, safer song, the sort that made men remember that women like to be complimented in public. The platters had changed from meat to small sweet things arranged with a care that said someone had counted the number of cherries that might please a girl and had decided to add one extra to be remembered for. Later, after the hall had yawned itself out and the lamps had been trimmed and men had found reasons to walk one another back to rooms that were not theirs so as to avoid going to bed alone, Ned walked to the Godswood. It was not a Godswood like Winterfell's. It had trees because men expected a garden to have them, and a pool because water flatters stone, and a bench because men like to sit where they imagine gods might. It did not have a heart tree. The air did not contain the old iron of the sap. It was a polite piece of green in a city that preferred stone. He sat on the bench and looked at the water until it looked back and then looked away out of modesty. He let his thoughts unspool and then tugged them back into a tidy coil because men who let their thoughts go where they wanted when they were very tired woke to find they had made promises to themselves they could not keep. Cersei came, not caring that the hour was awkward. She sat at a distance that said both, "I will not bite and do not presume to touch me." For a while they said nothing. The sound of the city at night is a different sound than the one it makes by day. The laughter is lower. The carts move slower. The crying is more honest. "Do you have brothers?" he asked suddenly. "Alive?" she replied, with an edge that showed him the hour had not dulled her. "Yes, two. One of them is precisely as alive as one can be without being much use. The other one," she looked at the leaves as if they had been taught to keep secrets, "is better dead than I have been able to let the world know without letting it devour him." "I asked a foolish question," he said. "There are worse," she said. "Your father will come," he said. "He will bring with him the West. He will bring with him the knowledge that men owe him money and lives. He will bring with him the sense that men should be allowed to do whatever brings them through a winter as long as they do it quietly enough not to disturb his dinner. He is not a fool. He is worse. He is a man who believes he has already accounted for every possible foolishness and so is prepared not to be surprised. Do you love him? No, she said, and looked surprised at how easily the word came. which is to say, I admire his capacity to do what I have despised myself for doing less well. I do not love him. One does not love a wall. One leans on it. One resents it for being where it is. My children love him not at all. They will be polite. That is more than he deserves. He thinks he deserves worship. Men like that hate politeness because it is too precise to flatter. Ned let a breath move through him. And your brother? He asked, because honesty had already entered the garden and demanded to be fed. Jamie, she said, and the name fell into the pool with the smallest ripple. You will never like him. He will not let you. He does not know how to be liked by men who remind him of his failure to convince himself that what he did was the only thing to be done. He killed a king. He saved a city. He was hated for one and not thanked for the other. He chose to keep the name that made men spit because it gave him something he could see when he woke in the morning, rather than some thin, quiet satisfaction that made him feel he had traded one lie for another. You defend him, Ned said. I protect him, she corrected, which is different, and in the language of this city, more dangerous. You should know, he said, that when I speak to Stannis in a letter, I will not speak a word that makes your children into a stick to be broken just to make a sound. I will not. He paused. If he demands their lives, he will, she said. He loves the law because the law permits him not to be complicated. He is the only man I have ever met who would prefer a rule to a kindness. He is honest. I almost despise him for it less because it makes him predictable. It also makes him a man who will throw a child into a pit because the path around it would be an exception. Ned looked at the water and thought of Stannis's tight script. I will not let him do it, he said, not with his voice but with his spine and the set of his jaw. He will not forgive you for that, she said. And he will be proud of not forgiving you. Pride is a roof that leaks, Ned said. They sat until the night had settled itself like a cloak, and the gardeners, the kind invisible in day, had made their quiet rounds and gone. When they left the Godswood, they did not look back, because a polite garden cannot hold a promise for you while you are away from it. In the dawn that followed, the city had a new face, as cities do, a face that pretends it is the old one. Men woke with headache and fresh pinions. A raven arrived with Stannis's second letter, and another with a crabbed hand that belonged to Maester Luwin. Luwin wrote that Robb had read his father's letter twice, then gone out to the yard and put a sword through straw until straw lay everywhere and boys collected it to stuff a mattress because resources were not to be wasted. He wrote that Bran had asked questions not easily answered and that Rickon had stolen a heel of bread from the kitchens and had been caught and not punished because the cook had decided he would rather report that the boy had stolen it for his hound and pretend generosity than tell the truth and admit to poor locks. He wrote that Catelyn was the weather and the weather was cold, that she had not changed the placement of any boots. Ned folded it with care. A man who cannot fold a letter without cracking its wax has no business folding a realm. Tywin Lannister's outriders arrived before noon, the dust of their arrival a statement in itself. They did not ride into the city. They occupied a field at a distance perfect for being perceived as a courtesy or as a threat depending on the eye that cast it. A private message came that the Lord of Casterly Rock would present himself at the hour before sunset. Clothed as a man comes to pay respect to a house, he might someday have to order torn down. Ned dressed without ornament. Barristan wore his white and made gold seem an alloy. Cersei chose a gown that made her look like she had never known anything but the freedom of choosing what to wear in a room built for choices. The chairs were arranged so that the visitor would have to walk farther than he liked before his knees were permitted the comfort of being bent. Lord Tywin came as measured men do, neither slow nor quick, a tide along marble. He wore no ostentatious lion, only a small brooch with a lion's head that could be admired without causing a man to hate him for the jewelry. His face had been carved by an artist with a grudge. He bowed precisely enough to be studied later by men who make a living measuring bow depths. Ned Stark, he said, and the use of the name without title was an art. Lord Tywin, Ned said. He did not return the art. He gave him the courtesy of a title held long enough to not be a jeer. Cersei sat, not moving. Tywin did not look at her as one looks at a daughter one wishes to see. He looked past her as one looks at a wall one has arranged the room around. "You have made a clever arrangement," he said without prelude, and his voice was what it had to be, iron sheathed in velvet. "The faith loves a wedding. The city loves a spectacle. You have given them both and called it stability." "I have given them both," Ned said, "and I have called it what it is. The minimum required to keep men from bleeding each other in the streets while their children go hungry." Tywin's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of approval. "The minimum," he repeated. "You speak of this as if you are a man replacing a rotten beam with a sound one. There are those who will call you a usurper elegantly disguised. There are those who will call me a man reluctant to be thanked," Ned returned. "A usurper requires a certain appetite for praise to fuel his nerve. I have an appetite for work." "Stannis," Tywin said. "Stannis," Ned agreed. "He writes, he declares. He will not be moved by music." "Then he must be moved by stone," Tywin said. "Or by hunger." "Or by a council," Ned said, and watched something in Tywin's eye, a calculation, a tactical map of pride and permitted objections, adjust. "A great council is called. The High Septon will place his hands upon it and make it a thing the ignorant will not dare to call rebellion." Tywin allowed the corner of his eye to communicate the dismissal of ignorance as a trait of the small folk, as one might excuse a hound's bad breath. "A council," he said, tasting it. "There are men who get what they want by calling it something else first. I do not care what they call it so long as the realm is not dragged down behind their horses," Ned said. Tywin looked at Cersei then, finally, fully, and she looked back without flinching. "You have married," he said. "I have," she said. "You will produce evidence of the marriage as men recognize it," he said. Cersei's chin moved a fraction in acknowledgement of the vulgarity of fathers. "I will produce what is necessary," she said, and left the words cold on the plate. "Your children," Tywin said. "My children are under my roof," she replied, "and will remain so." "They are lions," he said. "They are children," she said, and something like thunder moved between them. A storm kept in. "You will keep the debt the crown owes my house in mind," Tywin said, turning back to Ned as if the two of them were the only ones permitted to speak in the room and the woman between them an arrangement of cloth. "I keep it in the ledger," Ned said. "I will pay what can be paid without starving the city. The rest will be a matter for a council in which you will speak and be heard." "I am always heard," Tywin said. "Not always obeyed," Cersei murmured, and Tywin pretended not to hear her, and therefore everyone was obliged to pretend likewise. He left without taking too much time, as rumored. In the hall afterward, the air tasted as if something had been cooked and not eaten. Men who had watched through door cracks nodded to one another and hurried away to tell their wives what they had seen a lord decline to do. Ned stood very still until the room had rid itself of observing eyes. Cersei breathed out as if she had been carrying the weight of a door in a storm. "You did not give him fear," she said. "You gave him respect wrapped tightly around an iron ball. It will bruise his palm later when he remembers it." "He will remember it," Ned said, "and perhaps he will include it in his inventory when he sits down in his tent to count what he has." "He counts all things," Cersei said, "except the cost of being him, that he will charge to everyone else whenever he gets the chance." That night, Ned did not sleep again. The hours came and were filled with the busy quiet of a castle keeping itself from becoming a story. He read again Mormont's letter and wrote one of his own to Gior, promising men and grain and reminding him that the strength of the wall was the strength of all the South, a thing many prefer to forget until told in a way that startles them. He wrote to Robb again, a shorter letter, telling him nothing he did not already know and telling it to him so that a boy who had begun to be a man might feel his father's hand on his shoulder while he slept. He rose before dawn and walked out to the training yard. Barristan was there, as he often was, watching younger men remember with their bodies what their mouths liked to claim. Jaime was not. The hound was, lounging in the way of men who are always ready to lunge. The boy Pate had a better blade and a worse stance. The latter would improve as he learned to trust his feet. "Sire," Ned said to Barristan, and the old knight inclined his head like a man acknowledging an equal at the one thing that levels men. "You have a visitor," Barristan said, and Sansa stepped from the archway with a roll that had been snatched from the morning baskets. She had not learned yet that bringing a roll to a yard is an invitation to have it stolen. The hound stole it. He did it slowly, so she would know he would allow her to be offended but not to stop him. "You?" she began, then swallowed her reprimand. "You should ask. The dog doesn't always bark before he bites," Sandor said, tearing the roll in half and handing the larger part back without looking apologetic. "Then he should be taught manners," Sansa said, courage wearing the dress of propriety. The hound made a noise that was almost a laugh and might have been a cough. "Your sister would use her teeth," he said. "She would," Sansa agreed, and only then looked to her father. "I am to go to the September with Lady. It's not for a ceremony. It's for—" She hesitated, because even girls taught to speak plainly do not always have a word for comfort. "Prayers." "Go," he said. "Choose a side aisle where the light is kind." She went. The hound watched her go as if she were a kind of creature he understood less briefly than he understood other creatures. Barristan moved a boy's elbow with the end of his practice blade to nudge him into balance. And then the day that had just begun spread itself out on the table and demanded to be eaten. Letters, audiences, a woman with a petition about her husband's boat, and a man with a petition about a neighbor's fence whose case required attention because the neighbor had friends who knew songs. A visit to the armory to count pikes. A quiet moment where he stood in a doorway and watched Tommen and Myrcella with dice and marbles, learning how chance felt in their hands and felt the unfamiliar move in his chest. A tenderness that did not belong to him and yet claimed him anyway. Renly brought news that the Reach had begun loading. Peter brought news that the men he'd hired to unload would require more coin than they had agreed to because men always require more coin than they have agreed to. Varys brought news that a ship had been sighted off Dragonstone and then had not been sighted again, which might mean anything. Pycelle brought a cough and a wash of words about herbs. He would be delighted to grind against throats that would never be soothed by any balm the Citadel had named. Toward evening, as the lanterns were lit against the dusk, as the courtyard cloister cast its long arch of shadow, as the city decided it would give itself one more day before it gave itself to something else, Syrio Farrell came to the door of the chamber where Ned sat with the ledger again and stood without bowing. For men who have bowed before princes do not bow to kings unless commanded. "Your girl danced today," Syrio said. "She is always dancing," Ned said. The relief he felt at a simple report of the ordinary was almost humiliating. He disguised it by reaching for the coin jar and producing 3 to lay on the table. Syrio did not touch the coins. "She is water," he said. "She has not yet learned that water may take a man's shape and still be itself." "She will," Ned said. "She will be taught," Syrio corrected mildly. "The teaching is mine. The learning is yours as well. You have given your daughters to a city that would like to ruin them. You must ruin the city by raising them in places where it cannot see." The coins glinted. Syrio looked at them as a man looks at a distraction. "I will come to the yard tomorrow with real swords," he said. "She will not be allowed to be cut, but she will be shown where the cut would be. A man taught by pain learns to be cruel. A girl taught by near-miss learns to be careful." "Do it," Ned said, "and do not ask her to be anything other than angry. She will make that into accuracy." Syrio bowed then, the short, courteous bow of a man accepting a commission, and withdrew. Night came again. A city sleeps in pieces. Some never sleep at all. The garden's thin pool reflected a moon that did not belong to it. Fat candles burned down to their collars. Somewhere, beyond all this, the sea rolled against itself and muttered a warning that men mistook for gossip. In the hours that belong to men who have been denied sleep by the idea that a thought might leave them if they close their eyes, Joffrey went with Sandor to the practice yard and struck at a post until his hands gave him the gift of pain. He made a face when he looked at the blood and did not look away. "He will take it all," he said, as if confessing to a terrible fear and hoping that the night would swallow it. "He will take all the work," Sandor said. "If you let him." Joffrey's mouth twisted. "I will cut him," he whispered. Not yet, Sandor said. Not clever. Not in this light. Wait until a man becomes what he pretends to be. Then you cut what he cannot deny he is. I hate him, Joffrey said again, quieter. I've hated better men, Sandor said, and then, because boys need sometimes to be offered a task rather than a platitude, hold your hand tighter. Do not give the post the satisfaction of making your fingers open. In a tower room, Cersei lay awake and stared at the canopy, where a scene of a garden had been embroidered with women in it who had never been asked to decide anything. She envied them and despised them and wished they'd had the sense to burn the thread before letting someone stitch them into a man's ceiling. In a bed that had learned to keep counsel, Ned lay on his back and counted the list of men he would have to disappoint tomorrow. He found the number did not scare him as much as the insistence of the sea did in his ears. He sat up, swung his feet to the floor, and did not light a candle. In the dark, rooms returned to being spaces rather than stories. He welcomed that, by morning, the Great Council had become a rumor with enough legs to carry it to every tavern in the city. Men argued over whether it would be held in the Great September or in the Dragon Pit or out in the fields where they could see the sky and imagine the gods watching and nodding. Women decided what to wear in case they passed a man going to it. Children counted leaves and convinced themselves they were coins. Ravens flew. Replies began to arrive. The Aerie sent a polite apathy that felt like a man shutting a door very gently in one's face. Riverrun sent a fervor phrased in terms of duty that tasted like a call to an old honor. Old Town wrote that it would dispatch a learned man with a voice that had once cowed 2 boys into returning a stolen pie. Highgarden sent a promise that smelled of apples and calculation. Storm's End's letter came folded as sharp as a blade and declared that Renly would come with dignity and a number of men that was not small. Dragonstone sent a 3rd letter in Stannis's hand, in which he allowed that he would stand where the law stood and would not stand where men had pushed the law to the side just because they found it in the way. The West wrote that it would be represented by men who could count. The North wrote that if the roads held and the rivers did not trap them, they would come. White Harbor's seal carried flour dust that made Ned's mouth dry with memory. Barrowton's reply had mud on it, as if it had been written in a yard where a horse had chosen to stand in a way that invited a man to say something bitter about his lord. Winterfell wrote not to say they would come. Winterfell wrote as if it were the earth itself saying, I will stand here. Come if you like. In the days before that council could be a room and not merely a rumor, there were other rooms that had to be navigated. One was the small chamber where Janos Slint, puffed with pay and the kind of self-importance that grows in men who are paid well for unlovely work, came to stand and explain why his men needed more coin and fewer questions. You will have fewer of both, Ned said. You will have more discipline. You will have less theft. You will replace the men who grin when they should be ashamed, and you will put men in their place who blush. The gold cloak is not a bribe you wear on your shoulders. Janos turned a shade that suggested either affront or the onset of a complaint of the bowels. My men serve the city. They serve their oath, Ned said. If you cannot say that back to me without blinking, then you will step down and I will put a man in your place who can. If you can say it now and mean it. Later, I will know whether you did. Janos managed the words. Whether he managed the meaning would have to be learned with time and the unpleasantness that keeps cities from falling into drains. Another room was the small one where Pycelle shuffled and Cersei listened, and the question of whether certain herbs might be sent to a lady in the castle without her name becoming a rumor that would attach itself to a stomach and never let go. Pycelle coughed, delighted by the delicacy required of him. Cersei narrowed her eyes at him and made his cough become genuine. Another room was Renly's solar, which he had made into a place where men forgot their rank if they were foolish, and where, if they were clever, they pretended to and then remembered at the end of the wine. He spoke of banners and of colors and of marriages that might end wars before those wars could afford themselves. He showed Ned a map on which the walls of the city were drawn in a way that made them look like a string thrown across a table. He asked a question with his eyes he did not ask with his mouth. Will you make me something I can be proud of? Ned left with a headache and more caution. Arya, meanwhile, fought a boy with a blunted sword and learned, without blood, how pain teaches its lessons with speed. Sansa learned a dance that would be danced at the feast after the council was declared, and which would be judged by ladies who had forgotten how to be kind. Myrcella learned a prayer. Tommen learned how to move a piece on a board in a way that made his tutor blink twice and then smile because the boy had made a mistake in an interesting direction. On the second day after Tywin's arrival, a package came, not a letter, and it was from the wall. Inside was a thing wrapped in rags that had been burned. The smell was wrong. Jeor Mormont's hand, scrawled on a slip, explained that it had been taken from the arm of one of the rangers killed and then risen. The hand had been cold when it should not have been and had not warmed over the fire. It had clutched blindly. They had burned it before it could clutch anyone. Ned held the rags with a grim face. Cersei did not come near it. Peter came very near it because he liked to see things up close in which men could not easily see profit. Varys hovered, disliking a thing that did not fit any rumor he could cajole into his nets. "We will show this at the council," Ned said softly, "to no one and to the air and to whatever gods patronized rooms where men tried to be brave by thinking. Not as a trinket to frighten children, as proof." "Proof," Peter murmured. "Men enjoy proof. It permits them to ignore all the things they cannot see and thus do not have to believe." "Show them," Cersei said, "and let them call you anything afterward. They will, whether you show them or not." He sent another letter north. He sent ravens to lords who would be inclined, by temperament and by the shape of their lands, to think first of walls rather than of dance. He slept a little and dreamed of a tree whose bark was smooth where it should have been rough, and of a hand in the snow that did not know it was dead. The day before the council, men began to arrive in earnest. Banners stood in orderly lines outside the city like a field of planted wills. Within, the streets swelled. Long tables went up in alleys. Wine merchants smiled without showing too much tooth. Thieves congratulated one another on the presence of men with poor attention to their purses. Women instructed their children in the art of not being underfoot while still being near what mattered. The morning of the council broke with a sky that had the color of polished pewter. Bells remembered which ropes to pull. The great hall could not hold a thing like this, nor the dragon pit, which had too much ghost in it. The great September had been judged by the faith the proper place, and its steps would be crowded, its aisles even more so. Ned dressed in wolf and plain cloth. Cersei arranged herself as something men could not argue with and would enjoy doing so, and then be invited to consider the tax for. Their presumption. Barristan wore white. Pycelle wore importance. Peter wore amiability. Varys wore air. Renly wore a smile and the ability to not let it slip. Stannis Baratheon entered with a face like a lull red at dawn. He bowed not at all and called men by their names and titles with impartiality that could be mistaken for courtesy only by those who had never watched him fail to modify his behavior for anyone. He looked at Ned and did not attempt a greeting that could be mistaken for recognition of any authority but the one he had already given to parchment. The lords of the north came ragged with roads but upright. The lords of the reach came scented and sure. The Vale sent a man with a voice sweet as a bell who was not a lord and who had the capacity to make men put down their cups without realizing they had done so. The Riverlands men came with eyes that had learned to measure bridges for speed. The West sent men in red and gold with expressions that said they did not like sitting without their great lord and did not intend to enjoy the sensation. The Stormlands came in Renly's wake, laughing more loudly than they felt. Those who owed Stannis came with faces that did not need reminding whose debt they carried. The Crownlands brought the city itself. Faces that had witnessed sessions where kings had spoken and had learned to look bored when they were frightened. The High Septon began with a prayer that sounded like a bargain disguised as gratitude. He invoked the Seven. He invoked the realm. He invoked peace the way a man recommends a salve he has never used on his own wounds and yet insists healed him. Ned spoke first because he had asked to and because to let anyone else begin would have been to concede the tone. He spoke plainly. He did not declaim. He told the assembly what had been done. The wedding, the binding of houses, the intent to hold the peace. He did not demand to be called king. He asked the realm to decide what it wished to call the arrangement that had been made to prevent a sharp tearing. Stannis spoke next and told them that the law required them to choose him or to choose to admit they preferred anarchy. He told them that honor was a word that had been used to excuse 1,000 convenient cowardices. He told them that he would not be frightened and would not be flattered. He told them he would be king because the rule was written, and to refuse would be to refuse the writing itself. Renly spoke and made men laugh because he understood that when one must bear weight, it helps to be given a song to walk to. He spoke of the reach, and of bread, and of faces. He made it sound possible that a man could wear a crown without being broken by it. He did not say he would be king. He let men say it to themselves and then held his hands out to show that he did not intend to grab. Peter did not speak, but he made others think of numbers. Varys spoke briefly about the city and about women who bring water to men in buckets and the way that looks like a thing that only matters to them until the well runs dry. Pycelle droned. Tywin did not speak. Cersei, when asked if she would address the council, said, "I have married," and sat back, letting the weight of a fact act for her. Ned presented Mormont's charred bundle, and when the rags were opened, the room breathed in and then forgot how to breathe out. Even men who believed in nothing but their own appetites prefer the world to keep to its familiar terrors. Stannis did not change. Renly did, minutely. Tywin's eyes, for one unguarded blink, showed a calculation he had not expected to have to run. The High Septon crossed himself in a pattern that did not match any taught by the books. Old habits, older than the faith, come back when new ones fail to feel sturdy. "We have a wall," Ned said, his voice even. "We have a north. We have men who stand where the wind is not a rumor. We can speak of crowns until the candles die and make new ones in the morning and speak of them again. But the wall will not make a crown for itself. We will send men. We will send bread. We will decide here what we are to call the man who commands it." There were arguments afterward. Of course, men who had come to argue would not leave without arguing. Any more than a man would take a horse all the way to market and then refuse to haggle to prove a point. Some spoke for Stannis and Law. Some spoke for Renly and Grace. Some, surprisingly, spoke for the arrangement. For a city that had not bled for 2 days and had only had to change its mind rather than its lord. A lord from the Vale asked whether a marriage could be a right and not a distraction. A lady from the Reach asked whether a council that could also be called a king for just long enough to be useful and no longer. A northerner said that winter cared not a fig for the name of the man who sent boots, only that they be sent. At last, after the light through the high windows had shifted from white to honey and the air had that weary smell of a place where men have tried to think in company, the High Septon stood and said, as if it were his to decree, that much had been heard that would be discussed again tomorrow and the next day. He affirmed, with nudging, that men would return to their bread and their rooms with the knowledge that something had been started that could not be called treason without making a mockery of the faith's attendants. Ned sat and felt in his bones the sag of a roof with snow on it and the knowledge that one had propped it sufficiently for another night. When the council released itself into the afternoon, men poured out like grain. Tywin went first among the great, as if to demonstrate he needed no permission to leave a room. Stannis moved like a sword being put back into a scabbard. Renly glowed because he had been admired and because he had turned admiration into argument. He would need to be watched. Peter's eyes were bright with futures he would attempt to sell. Varys floated. Cersei's face did not move. "What have we done?" Sansa asked that evening, sitting with Myrcella and a platter of cherries whose stems they were trying to tie into knots with their tongues. "What have we turned the world into? A place where men will argue for a week in rooms where other men will bring them water," Myrcella said practically. "And when they finish, they will tell us whether we are to pretend to call a man something new or to continue to call him what we have always called men who sit in that chair." "What do we call him in the meantime?" Sansa asked. "Father," Arya said from the floor, where she was coaxing a little cat that refused to be coaxed. "And try not to hang your whole self on the word." That night, when the torches on the ramparts had been made short by use and the river had recovered its blade of light, Ned stood again at the window that had seen him before dawn days ago and looked out at a city that had permitted him, so far, to do his work. He felt the letter Catelyn had sent in his pocket like a stone he had chosen to keep rather than skip. He thought of the hand from the north wrapped in char, and of Tywin's bow, and of Stannis's unsmiling mouth. He thought of a girl who wanted to be water and a girl who despised being glass. He thought of a boy with a lion's mouth and a dog behind him who would tell him the truth if no one else would. He let the night come all the way. He did not call it peace. He called it a reprieve. In the morning he would count again. He would mend again. He would take up his name like a weight and carry it. He would try to keep a city from teaching his daughters to hate their own faces. He would try to make a man of a boy without breaking him. He would write to a wall and beg it to hold. He slept for an hour, like a man who has learned to take such generosity when given, and woke before the birds. The air at the window had the taste of a storm brewing somewhere far out to sea. He imagined a ship with black sails he could not yet see, a girl in a land where the sun burned with a different logic than the north's cold, dragons that were rumors and then not. He did not let such imagination keep him from breakfast. He ate bread. He drank water. He put on the cloak with the wolf. The day waited. He stepped into it. The first light was thin and mindful, not the kind that announces itself with bravado, and the river had that pewter sheen that makes men think of polishing rather than cutting. He saddled with his own hands because hands remember what minds forget when days get ornate. Barristan did not argue. He only stood and made the sight of a king, or almost a king, tightening girths into something that would not become a jest. 2 gold cloaks and a boy from the stables who had earned Pate's envy with his seat fell in behind. Ned turned the mare's head to the street of flour and kept it there, as Cersei had advised, and when the first woman recognized him, she put her basket down and did not bow, which was a kindness to them both. "Bread," he said to the steward waiting at the corner with men whose shoulders were shaped to carrying. 3 carts at this square, 2 at the next, and 2 at Hogshead Gate. "No speeches." Anyone who tries to stand on a barrel to tell a story to the crowd loses his place in the line and his meat tonight. The steward nodded, smart enough not to ask for the reason. The reason was that men with empty bellies are quick to lend them to other men's words if it means someone else's hunger will be louder than their own for an hour. They moved at the mare's pace. A girl in a brown dress with flour up her wrists trotted alongside for half a street, her eyes so wide her breath could not find its way out of her mouth. Ned held the reins loosely and made himself see the people not as a mass to be pleased, but as faces he would have to remember if he wished to tell himself he had done anything beyond making a good pattern. At Ropemaker's Row, a scuffle near the second cart swelled the air. 3 men had decided the length of their arms entitled them to more bread than the women with baskets at their feet. A gold cloak was correcting them with the flat of his hand, which made more anger than obedience. Ned reined in without drama and slid down. By now the gold cloak was conscious of being watched and tried to become more correct because the shape of the watching had changed. "Names," Ned said, and the men gave them too quickly for invention. He took 1 loaf from the cart, broke it into 3 as equally as any man can when counting with his hands, and gave each man a share. "You will stand at the back of the line," he said in a voice that made it clear the line did not begin or end at the cart's wood. "If you step forward before the woman with the yellow sleeves has taken her turn, you will be banned from this square for a week. If you obey, tomorrow your names will be called and you will start the line. Do you understand what a memory is when it belongs to a city and not to one woman who can be shouted down?" They understood or pretended. He did not require them to like the lesson. He only required them to carry it away and tell it again to their friends. The women did their business with their eyes on his hands, measuring for fairness with the suspicion that keeps fairness honest. On his second pass down the same street, a boy broke from the doorway and ran ahead with his arms wide as if he meant to stop the horse. He fell into a grin when the mare only lifted her feet and went around him. He turned kindly to his own folly and made a new game of it for the younger children watching, and this time he pretended he had meant it. Ned let him keep the dignity he had built for himself. Men carry that better than any dignity handed to them by a passing lord. Back in the keep, sweat had dried into salt at his hairline, and the mare had a stripe of foam along her chest. He gave her the apple himself. Pate watched from a respectable distance and then came close when invited. his hand on the mare's neck as if he could pull steadiness from her into himself. "You stood at the back," Ned said. "You may stand closer next time." "I don't want to be in the way," Pate said. "If you are in the way of something that should pass you, you will be moved," Ned said. "If you are in the way of something that should not pass you, you will save a life." He rested his palm on the boy's hair for a heartbeat, a gift of winter fathers, and went to change his coat before the first petitions arrived like waves. Janos Slint came first, his chest full of the air he imagined rank entitled him to breathe. He bowed and managed not to clank. It is a kind of skill to be loud only when one means to be. "My men are asked to guard bread," he began, as if confessing to a low task. "They are asked to guard order," Ned said. "Bread is its skin this morning. Tomorrow it will have another face. If that offends you, you will resign." Janos swallowed that, chewed, did not like the taste, but could not spit without making himself ridiculous. "There are expenses." "There always are," Ned said. "Most of them invented, some of them necessary. I will name which is which. Bring me your ledgers at sundown." He did not give him time to complain about the hour. "And send Jacelyn Bywater to me." Jacelyn came with a face that had faced wind and did not mind if it failed to flatter him. He was long and angular and had the expression of a man who had never liked a boot that pinched. His beard was trimmed to keep oil out of it, not to please a mirror. He bowed with enough respect to remain a soldier and not enough to become a courtier. "You were once in the city watch when it was not gold," Ned said. "I was," Bywater said. "It was less fashionable then. We wore our oaths on our tongues and our purses on our belts. Now it's the other way. You know which men are bought and which are only rented," Ned said. "I know which drink," Bywater said, "and which can stop when told. Those are not the same lists." "You will be Lord Commander of the City Watch," Ned said. "As of now, Janos Slint will be relieved. He will retire with a purse fit for a man who has scrubbed something, not fit for a man who has saved the city. He will complain. He will likely survive his complaint." Bywater did not blink. "I will need names to cut and names to mend," he said, "and 2 good sergeants who can smell a lie. There's a man in the River Gate Barracks who has the ugliest hands I've ever seen. He holds drunk men like children and speaks to them like dogs. If you don't mind a man who thinks in the old words, I can have him presentable by supper. I expect him to think in words that are not easily bought," Ned said. "Bring him." Bywater tilted his head, as if granting the city the right not to collapse for one more day, and went to do the thing he'd been given leave to do. A small sound at the door signaled Peter, whose entrance was always half voice and half air. "You make friends quickly," Peter said, "and enemies with admirable efficiency. The difference between them is what they do when I leave the room," Ned said, and did not offer Baelish a chair. "There is a courtesy that invites, and there is a courtesy that keeps men standing until they grow interested in other rooms." "Your great council has grown more legs," Peter said, content to lean. Stannis's men were seen at a tavern where they should not have been, sniffing for speeches. Renly's men bought the tavern in exchange for a different kind of speech. The High Septon, I am assured by someone whose assurances I enjoy, does not intend to permit debate in the nave. He prefers marble to remain unspattered by truth. "Let him prefer what he prefers," Ned said. "He will hear what men came to say even if he pretends he fell asleep during the important parts. Lord Tywin has sent an invitation to Varys to visit him in his field and pretend they are friends." Peter went on, tasting the gossip. "Varys will go, because he can walk in and out of tents without being noticed even when invited with trumpets. He will not tell you everything said. He will tell you enough to make you think he has told you everything." "I will take what I can count," Ned said. "I have brought a thing you can count," Peter replied cheerfully, and set a small bag on the table. It made the particular sound coined money makes. Fees paid by men who needed to be relieved of the burden of waiting 2 weeks for their writs to be read. Ned did not open it. "Keep your coin," he said. "Use it to pay the men you intend to hire to unload grain." The coin that pays for order is only useful order if it doesn't come back through my door. Peter's smile sharpened. And yet you accept the bread baked from flour bought with money you refuse to touch, he said, a little in love with his own phrase. I accept bread, Ned said. I will not pretend it is anything else. Thank you. Peter's laugh was soft. He liked men who did not dance for him. They gave him new steps to learn. Renly wonders whether the Tyrells might be permitted to bring a few hundred more men inside the walls, he said, almost idly, which meant not idle at all. For the council, for dignity, for the view. No, Ned said. We are crowded enough. The walls are for comfort, not for counting. You are going to make me earn my day. Peter sighed with pleasure and drifted out, as pleased as a cat with a new house to map. Cersei came at noon with a map folded very precisely and no attendants at her heels. She set the map on his table and weighed its corners with a quill, a candle stub, a pine cone that had no business being in a southern castle, and a ring she was not wearing. Your field, she said. My councils, he corrected. Our storm, she said. Tywin will attempt to enter it as a man enters the sea, only to the knees at first. He will send smaller men in ahead of him to learn the temperature. He will pretend he did not push them. Stannis will be Stannis, Ned said. He will tell the sea his boots do not appreciate it. Renly will splash, she said, and the city will call it grace. They studied the map without touching. She pointed to the space between the September and the square. If there is to be trouble, she said, it will be there, where men do not feel the gods watching and yet think they are close enough to run inside if they need to pretend a piety. Bywater will set a cordon, Ned said. No cudgels, no blades drawn unless drawn first. Men with mouths quick and tempers slow. Good, she said, and then, after a small pause, Joffrey will be kept away from that place. Sandor will keep him sayable, Ned said, if he cannot be kept inside. He is a boy who has learned that to be seen is to be confirmed. You have learned to say his name without choking on it, Cersei observed. I have learned that a boy is not improved by a man's disgust, he said. He is only sharpened by it. She watched his face for a heartbeat. When this is done, she said, I will want a marriage that makes a city feel it has been asked to a feast and not to a funeral. For whom? He asked, cautious not to step into a pit dug for someone else. For bread, she said. For horses. For alliances that do not taste of desperation. You will not like the offers. You will like the refusals less. Name one, he said. My daughter, she replied, and her mouth made of the word an object she might lock away if she could. To a house that will not consume her and will buy the city a year of quiet. He thought of wolves and roses and fish and stones. Not the West, he said. No, Cersei said, with a spark that might have been gratitude and might have been a memory of pride. Not the West. If you must bind me, do it to someone who will not tighten the knot each time I breathe. We will speak later, he said, and she gathered her ring, left the pinecone deliberate and departed, leaving the map with its clean lines and its lack of small alleys. In the afternoon, Stannis came without men and without robes and without anything anyone would call humor. The guard at the door announced him with a care that implied his name had learned to enter rooms without permission before. You have my letter, Stannis said, and the second, and the third. I have, Ned said. He waved Stannis to a chair as one might wave a man to a plank over water. We will not decide it today. Of course not, Stannis said. You will let men who wish to be flattered have their say. You will allow a boy to be spoken of as if law were a balm for the lie that made him. You will delay out of politeness what must be done out of necessity. Ned felt the old, familiar flare. He banked it because fires do not improve in rooms where two men have come to prove they are dependable. There is a wall, he said. You saw the proof. I saw a charnel trick, Stannis said, but he did not sound certain enough to make the scorn stick. The wall has its own laws. It does not require me to be king to hold. It requires men with backs and food in their bellies and discipline at their spines. It requires a realm that will send such men, Ned said. A realm that is not burning with its own questions. Stannis leaned forward. Do not hide behind necessity to justify ceremony. Stark, you are not a man who hides. I am a man who calls things by their right name, Ned said. Everything you say is true. You are the heir by law. You are also the man the city will not accept as king without spitting blood for the privilege. The question is not what is white. The question is whether this white can be laid atop the current mud without making a worse mess. Stannis looked at him until looking felt like an act of defiance. I will not flatter them, he said. I will not flatter you. I do not want your flattery, Ned said. I want you to keep your men from sharpening their knives in the square until we have counted the bread and decided who must hold the scale. And if the scale says me, Stannis said, will you wear a crown in the meantime and call it something else? I will keep them from cutting each other while you carry your law into the hall, Ned said. Stannis stood. You were an honest man in a place that likes honest men only as stories, he said. It surprises me that you managed a wedding at all. It surprises me every hour, Ned said. When Stannis had gone, a thin man with a scar along his fingers hesitated at the door. He wore good wool badly. He smelled of tar that would never leave him. His head was respectfully low, as if forever seeing the shape of Dex. Speak, Ned said, allowing him the mercy of pretended privacy in a room that never quite granted it. Davos, the man said, of Fleabottom, of the Black Betha. He said the ship's name as if its sound were a wooden thing he could touch. Lord Stannis asked that he swallowed. Say that his meaning is not to insult the dead when he speaks of bastards, only to say true. He believes truth is a kindness, even when it feels otherwise. Truth is a tool, Ned said. Kindness is how you use it. Davos looked up. His eyes were good eyes, the kind that looked for the shore and could admit to not seeing it when it was not there. Truth kept me from drowning, he said. Kindness took my fingers. I would not choose again if I were asked. Walk carefully, Ned said. Men will try to steal you from your lord with smiles. Smiles break a ship more quietly than rocks, Davos said, and went away to be loyal in a city that did not know how to be loyal to anything but its own appetite. Syrio presented himself in the yard with two swords that had been made to bruise rather than cut. Arya's eyes went wide and then narrowed, because she had learned that delight is a trap if it keeps you from looking where the danger will come from. Hold higher, Syrio said, and then, when she did without hesitation, hold lower. The world will ask you to do both within the same breath. You must discover, with your own hand, which it is. She danced in, light as the sparrow she had once compared herself to. Syrio cut her path, not with the blade, but with his body and the shadow he made. She skidded, corrected, came again. The swords knocked with a sound that could be mistaken for play from a distance. Up close, men knew better. Jaime found them as men find their past, by wandering where they meant to go and arriving somewhere that contains more of their younger selves than they expected. He watched, arms crossed, leaning against a pillar as if he might take root there simply to irritate the masons. Better than the boy was at her age, he remarked to no one in particular. Your hand has never been better than anyone's head, Arya panted, too focused to aim her insult with artistry, and became briefly afraid she had spoken aloud to a man whose name was made of needle whispers. Syrio rewarded her fear with a quick stroke to the thigh that rang metal and left no mark. Jaime laughed, and it was genuine, which saved him. I deserve that, he said, which startled two pages and a squire into miscounting their steps as they went by. You will make yourself hated properly, he told Arya. It's a useful skill if you can control when it happens. She will control everything but the wind, Syrio said, because the wind will be the thing moving her blade. And when she cannot control, she will yield. I have never liked yielding, Jaime said. That was clear when you were 19, Syrio said, and Jaime inclined his head, recognizing himself named and not hating the naming. Sansa spent the afternoon in a library whose windows had learned to receive sun with patience. Marcella sprawled with the boneless grace of girls whose bones have not yet decided where they wish to insist on themselves. They read the same page and then another. The words were not the kind that men quote to prove they have read. They were the kind that teaches a hand to mend, an eye to judge whether cloth will hold a hem, a head to add quietly at a table and know where the shortfall will be before anyone else knows there is one. "I like this," Marcella said, stroking a diagram with a finger. "It says that the true cost of a feast is the linen, not the meat, because the linen must be laundered and mended and bleached in the sun. And if the sun doesn't shine, you must have 2 sets of servants, one for washing and one for spreading." It's like they are telling the truth and hiding it at the same time. "They are," Sansa said. "It's how truth is taught to girls. No one can say we weren't told, and yet no one noticed our knowing until we say no to a thing they wish we'd accept." "Will you say no?" Marcella asked, as if asking about a color for ribbon. "Yes," Sansa said, surprising herself with how easily it came. "When I can. And when I can't, I will say yes with a way of standing that makes it feel like no." "I will watch how you stand," Marcella said gravely, as if standing were a sword. In the kennels, Tommen knelt and tried to teach a pup to sit. The pup considered obedience and then found a moth more interesting. Tommen found this delightful rather than insulting. The kennel master watched with an expression that would not offend any lord and would not frighten any hound. "You have to make them think it's their idea," he suggested. "Isn't that lying?" Tommen asked, genuinely worried. "It's manners," the man said, and Tommen looked very serious for a moment, then laughed because the pup had discovered its own tail and loved it more than instruction. The day found its evening face. Torches were set to the walls with care. The courtyards learned to glow. Cersei walked with Tywin in a gallery where a merchant had once hung tapestries and sold them for twice what they were worth because men from the West pretend not to understand the price of cloth in the East. "You have invited the realm to tell you no," Tywin said, and did not look at the thread so much as the way it had been knotted at the back. "And then you will ask it to say yes afterward. It is a costly way to get what you could have taken." "You forget," Cersei said, "that my sons breathe. The cost is counted in their air. There are ways of taking that would leave less of it." "You tie yourself to a man from the north," Tywin said, "who does not know how to use a feast as a blade, who will never teach a boy to be feared merely by sitting, who believes bread is bread and not a currency." "He will not teach my daughter to be currency either," Cersei said, and in that flicker Tywin heard something he could not name and therefore dismissed as sentiment. "And he will not mistake your wealth for a virtue." "He mistakes honor for one," Tywin said. "That is worse because he believes it can be traded." "It can," she said, "for sleep, for the capacity to live with one's face." Tywin's mouth flattened. "I did not raise you to be traded. You sold me," she said mildly. "It is not an insult. It is the truth of this system. You got a good price. It bought you years of leverage and a stable river of coin. You would have got more if you'd had a son in my place to place differently. But you did not. So you had me, and you have me still." She stopped at the window where the city showed itself as a pattern of lamps. "Do not waste me by expecting me to behave like a son." Tywin looked at her then as he had not looked at her in years, as if there were a math in her that he had not yet learned to add out. "You are my blood," he said at last. It was apology and command and statement. "I am," she said, "which is why you will not tell me to break my children to prove to you I can wield a whip." He accepted the rebuke like an old man taking a step he'd intended to take anyway. "There is a man in the watch," he said. "Slint." "Out," she said before he could continue. "Bywater wears the cloak now." Tywin's eyebrow rose a fraction, the mathematical sign for an unexpected value. "Interesting," he said. "If he proves useful, keep him fed. If he proves honest, watch him." "I intend to," she said, and he left her then to go count banners and judge which would leave mud in his camp. At moonrise, Varys appeared as men appear in dreams, with the logic of rooms on his side. He folded his hands and told Ned quietly that men with Stannis had been warned by men with Tywin not to carry knives into the September. and that men with Renly had been instructed to carry the kind of knives one forgets are knives until they end up in a ham on a feast table. "Everyone is behaving," Varys said approvingly. "It is unnerving. It means they intend to misbehave with great aplomb later." "Then let's finish this sooner," Ned said. "Before aplomb." "Tomorrow," Varys said, "you will be asked out loud whether you intend to be crowned before the long counting happens. The crowd will enjoy the drama. The priests will enjoy the implication that they matter. Consider your answer tonight. Measuring words in daylight makes them thinner than when uttered." "I will not be crowned until the council names a king," Ned said. "I do not need to rehearse it." "You need to rehearse for the moment when some man says that Stannis is king and that he will give you his protection until his coronation," Varys said, a gentle corrective. "And you will, with great dignity, refuse to be protected by a king you do not serve." Ned inclined his head. "Thank you." Varys smiled his quiet smile that meant he had done his little piece for the day and now would go find someone who thought him harmless. The second day of the council was the day men came to test their voices against the walls. They filled the September with bodies and the square with expectation. Ned felt his heart slow to the careful pace it had learned climbing winter hills. He stood. He did not wait for silence. He did not shout over noise. He began, and the room decided it wished to hear a man who did not ask for its patience and yet kept it. He was asked, as Varys had said he would be, whether he would be crowned and asked the Seven to bless him. He answered simply that blessings did not stick to men just because they were called before the gods to be glued on. He would not wear a crown as a petition. He would wear it when the realm called it a fit tool to keep its own house in order. Men nodded, some in admiration, some because nodding looks like thinking. Stannis spoke again and made men who hated him admire him, and that, too, is a kind of power. Renly spoke and made men who should have known better begin to imagine themselves more handsome at his side. Peter arranged two men from different coasts to quarrel about the price of salt within earshot of a lord who knew the difference between real salt and whatever men call salt when the real stuff is expensive. Varys blinked. At mid-morning a murmur went through the crowd at the door. Ned saw Bywater before he saw the trouble, and Bywater's hand, in the air, was enough to hold it. Two men with knives were discovered under their shirts and were relieved of them. Bywater did not drag them out by the hair and make a show. He simply turned them around, told them they would be searched every time they entered any place with an arch in it for a month, and sent them away with their shame neat around their ears. The men's friends laughed at them because laughter is how men survive their own foolishness. The knives were placed in a chest. Later, a boy would be sent to melt them into nails. Then, just as the High Septon was swelling into a benediction that brought the word duty out of his mouth like a yawn, a voice from the nave's left side in that special way that, in a city, makes every other voice around it quiet. Two men were carrying a board. On it lay the charred thing from the north. Two other men followed with water and sand, because even in a place where men pretend to wield the gods' words, a sensible man brings the tools of a fire. Pycelle made a fuss that seemed designed to distract himself from the thing rather than to soothe anyone else. Cersei went still. Stillness can be as loud as a cry when everyone knows what your face looks like when it is not still. Stannis did not cross himself. Renly, for once, had no smile. "Proof?" Ned said into that air, and he did not linger on the word as if he meant to wring it for comfort. He said it as a miller says flour. The thing did not move. Char can't. But men leaned forward anyway to see whether it might, and in the leaning forward some of them leaned toward one another rather than away, and a room can be changed by that alone. After, in the quiet at the edge of the Great September, a man from Old Town with a clean face and the voice of a bell told Ned he would like to take the rags and test them according to an order of methods that had once been used in the days when dragons were not stories. Ned agreed. If he meant to be called a king by men who counted their barley twice, he would have to show them he counted the world the same way. In the afternoon's recess, Tywin came to Ned with Stannis and Renly not far behind, in that theatrical way men have when they wish to appear to be happening upon one another by accident. There were small courtesies. There was no warmth. "You cannot ask the West to sit while the law is bent," Tywin said. You cannot ask the law to sit while the West tips its chair on 2 legs and says it prefers to lean, Renly said pleasantly. I do not ask, Stannis said. I tell. And I will tell with men and with ships if the telling fails to satisfy. Then let us satisfy truth, Ned said, before their voices could become the city's noise. Whatever this assembly names I will enforce. Until then, all banners stay sheathed. My men will be between any 2 camps that cannot count past 10 without somebody punching someone. If you refuse, refuse in front of the gods, not in the square. Tywin accepted that as a concession he had not asked for and therefore could not be accused of grasping. Stannis accepted it because it was law written in a different ink and he could read laws wherever he found them. Renly accepted it because saying no would make him look difficult next to 2 men who made difficulty their badge. Night took the city again. From a balcony, Cersei watched torches move like insects. She did not like insects. She did not like men who resembled them more. She drank half a cup of wine and sent the rest away because she did not intend to speak with her father with her tongue softened. He came, as he always came, as if he had always been coming and the present meeting were merely a continuation of a conversation that had begun when he was a boy and had taught himself which servants could carry a command without blurring it. He accepted a chair because to stand would have been to suggest he might leave before he had finished. He is doing it, Tywin said without preface. Yes, Cersei said. You could try calling him by his name. Tywin ignored the impertinence as one ignores a door that is not quite closed. Husbandry, he said, with the air of a man considering a useful animal. The realm is his to plow or to ruin. He prefers to plow. It is unexpected. You remember being married to your duty, she said. Try calling it something else once in a while. Your grandchildren aren't fields. They are the harvest, he said. They are children, she countered, weary to the bone with being made to argue the obvious. And 2 of them are mine to keep alive while you count. He inclined his head to the admission that she could be trusted to do that much. Bywater, he said. A good name. I like a man whose name tells the truth. Keep him. Stark will, if you don't teach him to be proud of it, she said. Pride is a poison that makes men forget water puts out fire. I taught you pride, he said, and it was not a boast. You taught me to hide it, she replied. It is not the same lesson, and I have had to do much of the study on my own. He left content enough. He had found a lever and was satisfied to leave it in place until it would lift more. In a room sweet with lemon oil and quiet with clean linen, Myrcella slept with her hand open on her pillow, pragmatic even in sleep. Tommen turned his cheek to find a cool place and failed and gave up and went back to dreaming of dogs. Joffrey sat awake and watched the line of light under his door. There is a certain quiet only a boy who wishes to be a man knows. It contains the noise of imagined triumphs and the smell of imagined blood. He rose, wrapped his robe, and went to the window that looked on the yard. Below, in the moonlight, Sandor was a darker shape leaning on a darker shadow. You should sleep, Joffrey called quietly down. I should do many things, the hound said, just as softly, without looking up. What do you do when you hate a man you can't kill? Joffrey asked. Sandor thought about that for longer than the boy expected. I look for a thing I can make, he said at last. Hate makes many things. Most of them are shoddy. A good thing is a rare change. What did you make? Joffrey asked, too curious to sneer. I'll tell you when I find it, Sandor said, and the boy surprised himself by laughing. A short, broken sound that contained less poison than usual. He went to bed and dreamed, for once, not of knives, but of a dog with a stupid grin that refused to leave his side even when he shoved it. On the 3rd day, the council tried to decide what it had already decided and then found itself surprised when the result on the paper matched the ghost in the room. The High Septon stood with pomp and declared that, until the realm had measured itself against the law and found which of 2 men it wished to have at the head of its table for as long as tables were set, Eddard of House Stark would be protector of the realm. He did not use the word king because he did not wish for Stannis to leave in a way that would make a lesson of his back. He did not use the word regent because it would have felt like treason in a city that pretends treason is only a thing that happens in stories and never just at breakfast. Ned bowed his head and then lifted it. He did not change his expression because men watch for that and write poems about it later, and he did not have time to be in a poem. Stannis announced that he would not leave the city and would not raise his banner until the council had finished. Renly announced that he would entertain men he did not like and be liked by men he did not intend to entertain. Tywin announced nothing, but men who spoke to him later felt their purses weigh more or less for no reason they could name. In the square outside, a woman kissed a coin before putting it in her apron because sometimes coins need blessing more than men do. A boy found a ring and put it on and felt his life improve until it pinched his finger and made him cry. A baker burned a loaf and was forgiven by a man he had once been unkind to because the man had watched his daughter sleep and decided that keeping score was a way to make himself tired for no purpose. Bywater's men moved like a thread through coarse cloth. There were no riots. There were no triumphs. There was the ordinary miracle of men getting through a day without deciding to kill one another. It does not make a song, and yet it keeps the songs from becoming laments. That evening, with the title A New Weight Against His Breastbone and a city that had accepted the word protector into its mouth like a new fruit, Ned walked the silent corridor that led to the Godswood's polite copy. The lemon trees had been trimmed. A gardener bent, rose, bent again. Cersei stood by the pool, looking down as if it meant to confide in her and had not yet found its courage. "It is not what you wanted it to be called," she said without turning. "But it is what it must be. It is a bridge," he said, "a thing meant to be walked on and left behind." "Careful," she said. "Men like you underestimate how much the people down there enjoy pushing others off bridges and watching them fall." She turned, and in the gathering dark her hair seemed less a banner and more a scarf. "We will make a feast tomorrow," she said. "Not a grand one. A table broad enough to make men feel they are welcome to sit. We will send a dish to the gates of Stannis' camp, and a dish to the camp of my father, and a dish to every captain in the Reach. We will feed the High Septon's favorites so that they can complain about the seasoning rather than about sin. We will make a thing that cannot easily be broken by the word no." "You hate feasts," he said. "A simple truth in a city where almost every statement is either a blade or a purse. I hate pretending to be grateful to men who like watching me pretend," she said. "But I like eating, and I like my children eating, and I like the city not eating itself." She moved her ring along her finger and then off it and then on again, as if reminding herself that a circle is something one chooses to wear. "You will stand with me at the hall." "I will," he said. "And after," she said, "when you are called to a quieter room by men with papers and calculations, you will remember that we made something that fed people and pleased them and made them yawn rather than shout." "I will remember," he said. "Good," she said, and the word's edge was gentler than he expected. He left her there and went to find parchment. He wrote to Winterfell and told them the name the city had called him for now. He told Robb that it meant exactly as much as the work that went with it and no more. He told Bran that the steps in the hall had been scrubbed so well for the council he could see a man's face in them, and that this had startled two lords into tripping because they had never seen themselves so close to their feet. He told Rickon nothing he could use and everything that would make him laugh if read aloud in the kitchens. He told Catelyn. He told her what he could not tell anyone else, that he had become something like a wall and did not know how long he could hold, that he had not failed yet and that this felt like failure's cousin. In the rookery, Maester Pycelle pretended not to see the steadiness in Ned's hand as he tied the ribbon. In his own chamber afterward, Peter counted his made-up compromises and his real victories and decided he liked the taste of this arrangement. There were so many corners into which a man could tuck a neat profit. Varys set 3 candles in 3 different rooms and dozed for 5 breaths in each, the way a man only half invited to the feast of other men's futures must rest. Renly let a servant take his ring off and then put it back on again, as if he had married the entire idea of being admired. Stannis sharpened a quill. Tywin shared bread with a man who had once shared a battlefield with him and did not speak of family. Davos walked the docks and counted ships he could not own. Bywater stood at a gate and leaned his weight against the post and did not let it pitch. Barristan cleaned his sword with a care that was a prayer. Jaime passed the training yard and did not stop because he knew that if he did, he would be caught in a talk with a girl who would frighten him by reminding him of himself. Arya slept with her stick within reach and dreamed of water that carried her where she intended to go and not where it wished. Sansa woke in the night and sat with her feet on the floor and said to the empty room the words she had always said to the gods when she wanted to teach herself the shape of a day. Be kind. Be brave. Do not let them call me silly when I am not. Myrcella slept and drooled a little and would be mortified if told. Tommen murmured to a dream dog. Joffrey stared up again at women in thread on the canopy and imagined a different canopy of antlers and shadows and did not yet know the cost. Morning again, and the noise of a city deciding. In the kitchens, a boy split his thumb with a knife and did not cry because a girl from the Riverlands would laugh at him if he did. In the armory, a man counted nails turned from knives. At the gate of the gods, a small lord from the Vale arrived with dust on his boots and a belligerent pride in how quickly he'd gotten there in spite of excuses. At the king's gate, a pair of reach men with perfect hair borrowed money from a fishwife for the toll because they had given their coin to a storyteller who had told them something about the city they wanted to believe. By mid-morning, men were claiming seats at a table that had been made to look less like a throne's footstool and more like what it was, a place for plates. The hall looked less like a test and more like a respite. Ned stood at Cersei's side and watched the patterns of movement with eyes trained to see how storms arrive. Renly made a toast to bread. The High Septon blessed a chicken and forgot what he had meant to say midway and smiled instead of coughing. Tywin watched the faces that watched him and made a note of who looked away first. Stannis ate the meat put in front of him as if it had been measured and he would be called upon to recite its weight later. Peter had arranged for a musician who did not sing but made a lute speak of water and wind and slight mistakes that make a thing worth listening to. Joffrey came on time. Arya almost tripped him on purpose and then didn't, a triumph so small it would never make a song and yet it prolonged peace by an hour. Sansa sat where she could see the door and planned 6 ways to leave without being rude. Myrcella adopted a small knife as a pet and cut her meat into neat tiles. Tommen laughed at something that wasn't meant to be funny, and his laughter made 2 men stop sneering because sneering at a boy's joy in meat makes a man look uglier than he hopes. News came in soft, careful murmurs carried behind ears and between cups. Eastwatch had sighted lights along the shore at night that moved like men carrying lanterns where no path ran. A trader from Pentos demanded to see Peter's accounting and was told to sit down and try the cherries first. A whorehouse in the Street of Silk had set a rule that no man with a banner on his cloak would be admitted until the council was over. The rumor made a circuit of the room and left an unusual number of cloaks behind on chairbacks in its wake. In a lull that arrived like a gift, Cersei leaned her shoulder a hair's breadth toward Ned's and breathed. "He has done something unexpected." "Which he?" Ned asked without turning his head. "Renly," she said. "He asked Marjorie Tyrell to dance with the High Septon's favorite niece. He will make kindness a tactic until kindness becomes tiresome." "Then we must not let it become tiresome," Ned said. "We'll use it for a while and not forget it was a tactic when he decides another tastes better." "Good," she said, as if they had agreed to a route along the wall of a too-crowded room. Midway through the meal, a commotion at the door that was not a commotion, Bywater again, let in a single rider dusty to the eyebrows with a stag on his breast in the wrong color. He kept his helm in his hand until he stood close enough to the high table for his breath to be considered rude. "From Storm's End," he said to Renly first, courtesy before kin, and then to Ned, "and for the Protector." He handed a small roll of parchment to Ned, and another to Renly, and kept a third in his fist for Stannis, who took it without nodding, as a man takes a nail to be driven. Ned opened his, and the breath he lost was not from surprise but from the weight men feel when a thing they hoped would lie quiet has stood up to speak. It was a tally. It was a neat list of ships at anchor in Blackwater Bay, with names, and a second list of ships sighted last night with their lanterns hooded and their flags uncertain. It was a guest list of whose hands commanded them, and the guesses were not kind. "Illyrio Mopatus sends his regards," Peter murmured near his ear, as if complimenting a dish. Ned did not answer him. He kept his face taut by habit and nodded instead to Bywater, who nodded back, receiving an instruction that would be spoken to him later. "Count again, watch again, and this time send a boat that will look like a fishing craft and not like a wish." What he had a breath to see. What he had to fix to memory so he could act later was the way Cersei's lashes flickered when he said, quietly, "Merchants from Essos," and the way Renly tilted his head an inch toward Peter, and the way Stannis's hand, big and capable, clenched the side of reason and then let go. Tywin, across the hall, did not tilt his head at all, and yet the men behind him shifted their weight, as if the floor had decided to lurch and had warned them to brace. It was enough for one day. The hall ebbed and flowed. Cherries ate themselves. Songs ended where they should have. When the table had grown as tired as any well-used saddle, Ned excused himself and went to the yard where the air still had the smell of horses who had worked. Barristan joined him. An old white ghost one could lean against without fear of falling through. "Do you ever think," Ned asked, "not as a king, not as a protector, but as a man, that what we call peace is only a name for the hours between a city's temptations? I think peace is the name for the work we do when no one is looking," Barristan said. "Men like to see victory. They grow bored with maintenance. They forget that a clean blade cuts best."
Ned breathed.
The air was a little warmer than it had been the day he had stood in the same spot with a letter unopened in his hand. He thought of that letter now, safe in his small box. He thought of the hand from the north again, and of sails, and of a council that had called him a thing and meant it to be a bridge and not a crown. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," Barristan agreed. He slept. Not the heavy oblivion of a man with the hope of waking to find the world improved by his absence. Not the fretful skittering of a man counting his failures with each turn, but the steady, stubborn sleep of a mason whose wall is half high and must be higher before weather decides to test it. And in the morning a gull cried, and the city began again.